IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Monday, July 21st, which means we are 9 days away from Notre Dame kicking off the 2024 fall camp, and we are a month and 9 days from kicking off the 2024 season. I don't know about you guys, but I, over the last week, have definitely gotten the season is here kind of kick. And I got to tell you, there's been a lot of business things I've had to get taken care of the last week, and there's just a lot going on. But it's like I just want to focus on football now, and so I'm very excited to continue our season preview series. We're gonna have a lot of that this week, but today we're gonna talk about wide receivers, and so we're gonna kind of mix things up a little bit. We do like different types of aspects of the previews, but today we're going to talk all things wide receiver because we're going to talk about the 2024 season, the expectations, the preview, kind of go through the roster, do a bit of a season preview there, but then also talk about recruiting. And the reason that we're going to do recruiting today also is because of obviously the news that's happened in the last week of players like Dylan Robinson and Derek Meadows and Tanook Hines have all made choices to go somewhere else, and their name's kind of starting over from scratch, and they're back to the drawing board. So we're going to talk about that, but I think the two things tie together somewhat, at least from a standpoint of moving forward. The what has happened at wide receiver right now is not so much related to the current group, it's related to the past, but the current group can have an impact on what comes next. And that's what we're going to focus on today, is sort of that, that what comes next aspect of wide receiver recruiting and what Notre Dame needs to do moving forward to kind of figure out how does this not happen again? Like, look, you're going to have misses, you're going to have losses, you're going to have, players that they think they're going to get that they're not going to get, guys that they're excited about, that Notre Dame could go out and win a national title this year. And guess what? They're still going to have a player go somewhere else. That's just the nature of college football. That's the nature of recruiting. Georgia has had misses. Bama has had misses. Ohio State has misses. Michigan's had misses. Texas has misses. Everybody has misses. What you have to avoid is the consistent patterns at certain positions. And obviously in the 2025 cycle, that has been receivers been one of those issues. So we'll dive into that. So a lot to talk about today. And it's important stuff too, because this is a position where Notre Dame hasn't been good enough in recent seasons to say, hey, look, this is playing at a championship level. Can it get there in 24? Can it, or beyond? We'll discuss that as well. So those are all the topics of conversation today. I'm kind of, originally we're going to do a receiver and tight end preview, but just the way that everything kind of broke out, we're going to do just receivers today. And so we'll kind of break it into really kind of three sections, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And just a reminder for you all, if you have questions, obviously we're not doing mailbags at the end of the show, but if there's something that you want me to address, just shoot me, a super chat or jump on the message board at boards@irishbreakdown.com, and we can engage in that conversation there. It's a much better format to have a good, back and forth, give and take type of discussion in it. And one thing I will do during the chat is I will be paying attention to kind of the conversation, because I am curious of some of the expectations that you all have, which is going to be very interesting, because I think this is a very polarizing position right now for Notre Dame football in a lot of different ways. And we'll dive into all of that. So we're going to kick things off by talking about the current team, because that's the thing I'm most excited about. I'll be honest with you guys. Some of my passion for following recruiting has really waned in the last couple of years. And a lot of that has to do with just the changes in how recruiting is done now. It's just not something I'm as excited about in the past. And just the process is just a little, it just kind of takes some of that excitement away. And then, of course, with the season being close, you always want to talk more about the team as you get closer to the season. And obviously Notre Dame is getting right there. And this receiver position is a very fascinating one, because the conversation about the receivers it's so interesting, because it's really a much different looking group than it has been in recent seasons. And I don't mean even stylistically, I just mean personnel wise. The large majority of the roster at receiver right now was not on the team 2 years ago. They were not on the team in Marcus Freeman's first season. He's only been here 2 years, and all but 2 players on the current roster were not on the team 2 years ago. You have seen a complete overhaul of the wide receiver position in the last 2 years, but that doesn't stop the fan base, understandably. This isn't a criticism of you all or of us. It's understandably projecting onto the current group the woes of the past. And I'm understanding of that, because you can say, well, it's not the same coach. It's not. But until the new coaching staff proves that they're different than the previous staff, because, hey, you hope to the chance he stuck, he was different than Del Alexander. And ultimately, he wasn't. They had their different flaws and different issues, but they were this kind of the end result was the same. It wasn't good enough. Whatever the reasons, it wasn't good enough. So you look at this receiving core in 2024, and there's no doubt this group is going to have a very big say on how the season goes for Notre Dame. Are they the group that the season's hanging on the play of the receivers? No, I don't think so. When you look at Notre Dame and you think about how good they are at running back, and you think about how good they are at tight end and how good I expect them to be at quarterback, and then just the expectation of the line has to play well. Like, that's the group along with quarterback that you say, okay, that's what the season is. The results are going to hang on ultimately is the play of that group. Notre Dame can win a championship, but the receivers are just solid. It would take a lot of other things to go well, but they can, because look at Michigan. Michigan just did it. Now, as I've always said, you don't use the exception to prove the rule, but Notre Dame in some ways is sort of built like Michigan was. Great defense, run the ball, those type of things. Dual threat quarterback, although Riley Leonard's a much more dual threat than J.J. McCarthy was. Not that he could be. I think J.J. could have been a very dynamic run-throw quarterback. Michigan just didn't use him that way, except when, sometimes late in games or big games when he'd have to go make some plays with his legs. But I don't think this group has to be elite for Notre Dame as a team to be elite. What it does have to be is better than it's been. But even then, the conversation about receiver is still, I don't want to say frustrating. Well, I'll say it. It's frustrating because there's the group of fans that only watch games on TV, and then there's the group of fans that maybe see it differently. And I've had this debate for years with people, because they'll say, well, the receiving core is not good and they don't do this. And I'm like, where does that come from? Part of it's what they see on TV, because they see the end result. They see the ball not getting thrown, and then they'll maybe see a clip of one guy being covered effectively. And then there's the narrative that forms in the media about the receivers aren't this and the receivers aren't that. And I've argued for years that it's not a receiver problem. It's been a quarterback and or play calling problem. And I point to last year. I think it was part quarterback, part play calling, and part just a lack of confidence in the receivers coach to put the right guys in the right places. And I've pointed this out the last 2 years especially. We'll focus on the Marcus Freeman tenure, but I remember having this argument almost, immediately about like the season started, and just weekly we're having this debate. Oh, the receivers suck. The receivers suck. The receivers suck. And I don't know where this narrative comes from. And it can't just because you're watching on TV, because I would think most of you have an understanding, like, look, there's a lot I can't see about the receivers on TV. I don't read other people, so I don't know if other people are reporting it, but I'd come away from games and we'd come into the post-game show and you'd have this, the receivers suck, the receivers suck, the receivers suck thing all the time. And I'm like, did we watch the same game? Like, how is this a receiver problem? Like, where did this come from? And then there were times where it was a receiver problem, but that it just became a consistent mantra. And I don't know if it was being driven by somebody else outside of Irish Breakdown, or if it was just like they just became the easy excuse. I really don't know what it was. And there were times when the receiver core was a major problem. 2020, 2021 at times in some of the bigger games. When I look at the 2022 season, I kept telling everybody all the time, like, look, guys, the receivers are playing better than you all are giving them credit for. I'm not saying they're world beaters, but they're playing better. You look at the Marshall game. If Tyler Buckner can just hit a simple post route to a wide open Braden Lindsey for what would have been an 80-something, like 70-something 80-yard touchdown against Marshall, we're having a different conversation. And there were plenty of times where you'd say, if you guys saw what I saw, you would not be complaining about the receivers. You'd be pulling your hair out about the quarterback, or why the quarterback coach or why the OC is not getting the quarterback to throw the ball to open receivers. And I get people look at production. Somebody in the chat said, there's a lot of production and things like that. And I think that when you look at those type of things, you say you're not evaluating this properly. And then we get to the bowl game against South Carolina, and the receivers go off. Jaden Thomas has a big game. Braden Lindsey has some big plays. You saw the unit as a whole perform very well. And the comment that I had at the time was, guys, this is how they've been playing all year. The difference is the ball's now coming their way. I had a friend of mine who would have some frustrations about the receiving corps. And then he was at the Clemson game. And he came out of that game saying, dude, I get what you're saying now. Like, I completely understand what you're saying, because he saw it with his own eyes. Like, guys are getting open. The ball's not coming their way. Sometimes it was the O-line. Sometimes it was the quarterback. And then sometimes, like, the receivers didn't get the job done. Tobias Merriweather's got to catch that ball against Duke. There's just, you've got to make that play. Rico Flores has got to take a better angle on a backside seam route against a closing safety. He doesn't. He goes vertical. He takes it up high, and the guy undercuts it, picks it off. That's a receiver problem. So the receivers weren't world beaters, but they were better than people think. But you come into the season, and now it's like, well, I just got to see the receiving corps play better. You got to see the receiving corps play better. And then ESPN comes out with an article the other day, and it was a fair article. I mean, I'm not criticizing them. They talk about the receiving corps is the big question mark. And I said, okay, I get it. But to me, I think offensive line is a much bigger question mark to me than the receiving corps for a host of reasons. And so you lead us to where we are now, which is this. People are looking at this receiving corps, and they are seeing a lot of new faces. They're seeing a lot of talk about how they will or won't be, what they will or won't be, and what they could or couldn't be, or should or shouldn't be. And I think Notre Dame fans, by and large, have understandably and rightfully entered sort of a I need to see it mode. And I think that's a very fair place to be. And that's honestly where we should be, however you view the receiving corps, positively like I do, or negatively like some in the chat do, which is very fair. We should both be in the framework of, okay, but they've got to now prove it. But so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to grant that. We know they've got to prove it. But we're not going to spend the next month and a half saying, well, they just got to prove it, and that's all we talk about, because otherwise we don't need to have shows next month and a half. Hey, nothing to talk about. Let's just see what they do in the fall. Well, we're going to talk about what the expectations are and what we think this room could be, and then they have to go out and back it up. And so that's kind of going to be the focus of what this group needs to be. So when you look at the recent history of the position, I do believe it's a lot more complex than a lot of people in this discussion realize it to be. The play of the receiving corps has not been as bad as people have made it out to be. Somebody sent me a comment recently, and I don't know who it was, but apparently someone that covers the team said something about how the Notre Dame receiving corps is like a mid-level group of 5 team. That's like just one of the most absurd things I've ever seen and never heard in my life. And I don't know how people that are actually watching this team play can come away with that. There's a difference between saying, hey, they're playing like Ohio State and they're playing like this team. They're not even close to that. But we've watched them against mid-level Power 5 teams, and we watched them torch those teams. We watched them torch mid-level Power 5 teams. They are a solid receiving corps, a good Power 5 receiving corps that needs to be much better if this offense is going to take that next step and really become a championship group. And the way that Mike Denbrock runs his offense, especially, this is where it gets important. I would argue that there's going to be more pressure on the wide receivers now going into 24, 25, 26 with Mike Denbrock in charge than there was the last 3 years. Because the way that the offense was run in recent seasons, even last year, the receiving corps they are a group that needed to be complementary part of the offense. They were not asked to be the dominant group. They were asked to be just, hey, look, make some plays when you need to. We've got a great tight end, and the tight end room is loaded, and we've got good running backs. We've got a great O-line, or supposed to have a great O-line. We're going to play really good defense. This is looking at it from what the coaching expectations were. You guys don't need to be great players. We don't need you to be Ohio State. We don't need you to be, USC in their prime. We don't need you to be Clemson 2018 with the great receivers they had. We don't need you to be that. Just be good complementary players. When your number's called, you got to step up and make plays. That's been the role of the receiving corps in the past. And at times they played that role well, and at times they didn't. And we'll get into why. But I actually believe heading into 24, now that Mike Denbrock is here, the stakes have been raised for the receiving corps, because the way that I believe Mike Denbrock is going to run this offense, they can't just be complementary players anymore for this offense to really reach its full potential. Now, I don't think they need to be elite for Notre Dame to win a title. I've talked about that. I think they're good enough on defense. They're good enough for quarterback, running back, tight end, if the offensive line can figure it out. And I'm talking about over the next couple of years. I'm not just talking about the 2024 season. I'm talking about the next couple of years. But the way that Mike Denbrock runs the offense, the receivers have to be better than that now. They have to be more of a focal point, because Mike Denbrock's offense is very much more receiver driven. And that's been true. That was true at Notre Dame in 2014 and 2015. That was true the last couple of years at Cincinnati. And that was certainly true the last 2 years at LSU. And it's going to be true at Notre Dame. The offense is going to be, there's a sort of a double-edged sword here, right? Or I don't know if double-edged sword is the way to look at it, but there's two ways of evaluating this. One is, for the receivers, it's going to be great, because you're bringing in an offense that's far more receiver friendly, that's far more geared towards the design of the system is to create more, one-on-ones, more isolations. The pass game is going to be built more to get guys open. It's going to, create more opportunities. Hey, you're matched up against this guy, so creating favorable matchups. And it's going to be geared more towards getting the ball outside to the receivers. Yes, the tight ends are always going to be in a focal point of the Notre Dame offense. Always should be anyway. But at Notre Dame, you have to look at the receiver position now and say, hey, look, you're just not a complimentary player anymore. You have to be a focal point of what we're going to do if we're going to truly reach our full potential. Now, I don't think that requires that they have like a star. They don't need a Marvin Harrison Jr. or a Malik Neighbors. We've talked about that. There's that just the quality of the unit as a whole is going to be important. But what it doesn't change is the fact that in this system, there's going to be a lot more opportunities for you to make plays. Now, the counter is when you don't play well, it's going to be more glaring now, and it's going to be more problematic now. You're not going to have as many games, in my opinion, where you go out and beat a number 4 team in the country and throw for less than 90 yards like they did against Clemson 2 years ago. That was a bit of an anomaly. And so when you look at the receiver position now, they have to be more impactful. They have to make more plays. They're going to be more of a focal point to address some of the things in the chat. Does this take away from the tight end position? No, it doesn't. If anything, it enhances the tight end position, because now if the receiving core is good, it enhances the tight end position, because now if they're doing more things to spread the ball outside, it forces defense to defend for the wider parts of the field. Marcus Freeman said something to me in an interview his first year, before his first season, talking about what he expects his offense to be. And one thing he said is, look, we need to force defenses to defend the entire width of the field and length of the field. That's the goal. What's a fine goal to have? I share that goal. I think that's a smart goal to have. That's what I believe in offensively. I got to spread you for width and vertical, right? But that's not what we saw. That's not what we saw on the field the last 2 years. What we saw was an offense that was really contracted. And when you looked at the production, the pass game production, like last year, for example, a lot of the pass game production came from inside. Your top 2 leading receivers were who? It was your slot receiver and it was your tight end. Your tight end would have been your leading receiver if it wasn't for the fact that he got injured. Now, he led the team in catches by 2, but he was second in yards. Well, that's not true if he plays all season. Mitchell Evans, who I'm talking about, Mitchell Evans and Chris Tyree. Mitchell Evans had 3 more catches, but 62 fewer yards than Chris Tyree, but he played 4 fewer games than Chris Tyree did. So the production was close, even though he played far less. But you look at it and you say, okay, well, your top 2 receivers In yards were your slot receiver and Chris Tyree, and your tight end and Mitchell Evans. Your number 4 receiver was Jordan Faison, who only played half the year and spent a lot of time in the slot. And then you had Jaden Greathouse, who was your number 7 receiver. So if you look at your top 7 receivers, 4 of your top 7 receivers were, well, let's spread it out a little bit. Let's go to the number 8, Holden Stace. 5 of your top 8 receivers spent the majority of their time in the slot. And if you break down some of the other plays and you look at Tobias Merriweather, for example, who had 284 yards last year, I can think of 2 big plays that Tobias Merriweather had where he was in the slot when he was caught. The long pass that he had against the catch and run he had against NC State, he was in the slot. He had a long, I think it was Pitt. It was either Pitt or Wake Forest. I forget which one of the late home games that they had. It was either Pitt or Wake Forest. But he catches a long pass, gets him inside the 10-yard line, and he lined up. It was a post route. He lined up from the slot. So that's 2 big plays of at least 100 yards, almost not half, but close to half of his yardage were on a couple plays that he got from the slot. So if you actually look at the actual slot production last year, it was enormous. And that was true in 2022 as well. When you look at the Notre Dame offense in 2022, Michael Mayer was your leading receiver. He had more than double what anybody else on the roster had last year. Jaden Thomas did a lot, who was the number 2 on the roster in receiving yards, did a lot of his best work as a slot guy. So what does that mean for the offense? Well, what that means for the offense is the field is constricted. And so when you run the ball as much as Notre Dame does and as effectively as they do, especially in 2022, but last year they were a very good running team as well. Okay, our focus is now in between the hashes. We've got to stop the running game. We've got to stop the tight end. We've got to make sure the slot receiver doesn't do damage to us. And so what a lot of the focal point is more restricted. So I can get my safeties teed in on getting down there because I know that they're not going to threaten us on the outside. They're not, just by the sheer design of the offense, they're not going to stress us outside. And so there was a lot of things that happened when you look at the receiver position and how teams defended Notre Dame to say, look, they were just afterthoughts at times. I mean, there were times, and this was my frustration last year. You guys have heard me say it before. I complained about it all year last year, where and it sounds like a quarterback problem, but I don't think it was, because I think this is what he was kind of taught to do. But I'm watching outside receivers get open. I'm watching Tobias Merriweather get open. I'm watching Jaden Thomas early get open. I'm watching Rico Flores get open sometimes. He didn't get open quite as much. I'm watching some of these outside receivers go get open. And I'm like, why isn't the ball coming to him? And the quarterback's just locked inside, just locked into tight end and slot receivers. Well, guy Sam Hartman was a 60-year senior. He didn't all of a sudden forget how to read a defense. Yes, there was the learning a new offense type of thing, but it got to the point where we just had to accept the fact this is what he was being taught to do. He's being taught to focus on these routes. And a lot of times when they would throw the ball outside, it would be more geared towards you had a designed one-on-one that you were throwing to. It felt like it was kind of forced. Like, okay, this is where you're reading with the football. This is where you're going with the football. So it was just a different way of defending the team. Now you look at Mike Denbrock. And I did a breakdown, and I'm going to have to find the numbers. I have the sheet somewhere. I don't know where it is. I'm just going to redo the data. But I did a breakdown of the LSU offense last year, and I did the 9 Power 5 games they played in the regular season. So the 8 SEC games plus the Florida State game. Didn't do the bowl game because Mike Denbrock wasn't there. Didn't count Georgia State, Grambling, Army, because I don't care what you do against those teams. So I broke the game down, and I broke every game down in all types of different ways. But one of the ways I broke it down was who was the target? You know, who was the target on the play? And so there's 2 ways to look at that. One is, okay, it was Malik Neighbors. But I didn't care as much about that because I didn't need to know how, Malik Neighbors' data or Brian Thomas's data. What I cared more about was what is the breakdown between the different positions. So I would count, X, Z, and, I call it the F, which is the slot, right? And so how did you break those positions down by target? And when you look at the data, it was almost identical, the number of targets that each position had. And the outside positions were slightly more than the one slot position. So if you add them up together and then put the tight end involved as well, there were more balls thrown outside than to outside receivers than there were inside. Now, just so we're clear, when I'm breaking this down, I didn't care who it was at a position. So if it was like Malik Neighbors in the slot, I didn't count him. Well, he's normally their Z. So I cared about the position, not the player. So if it was a boundary throw, it was a boundary target. I don't care who was lined up in the boundaries. Does that make sense? So when I broke it down, you see that this is a far more outside-driven throwing game. That was true for him at Cincinnati, and that was true for him at Notre Dame. Mike Denbrock is going to stretch the pass game more for width and vertical. There was a play from the spring that we talked about that Vince just loved. I think it was Vince or Sean. I forget which one just raved about it. But they threw a deep ball down the field. Guy catches it for a long touchdown. And they're celebrating like they did something. And Mike Denbrock he wasn't annoyed, but it was kind of like matter-of-factly, like he was making a point and was like, hey, we don't, knock that off. Like, that's what we're supposed to do. That's what we do here. And they come back and they do it again. His point was, this isn't like you don't get excited because you got a ball and you made a big play. That's what you're expected to do, and we're going to throw it, and we're going to throw it out there a lot. The boundary position last year at Notre Dame was an afterthought. It was literally an afterthought. You'd get some targets at Jaden Thomas early in the year, but for the most part, it was an afterthought. The boundary position in 2022 was an afterthought. The boundary position in 2024 is going to be much, much more of a focal point, and that's going to matter. The Z position is going to be last year was just a big play position, right? It's going to be a much bigger part of the offense this year. You're going to have to get production from there. So this puts an additional amount of pressure on the receivers because now the expectation for you to perform at a high level is much greater now than it was in the past. You could just be kind of solid in the past and you're going to win some games. Now it's going to be, if you're going to win these big games, this group has to play well. If you're going to go on the road and beat Texas A&M, this group has to play well. I don't know that was true in the past because of how focused they were on the inside aspects of it. Now, what that's going to do, in my opinion, and we circle it back around to, well, what do we know about Notre Dame? Notre Dame's been very good at tight end. They have a preseason second-team All-American coming back at tight end. You've got Eli Raridan coming back at tight end. You've got Cooper Flanagan coming back at tight end. So what does that mean for the tight end position? Here's what it means. If the focal point, if the ball is being thrown outside more and vertically more, then it forces the defense to expand its coverage. It forces the defense to evaluate and game plan and defend Notre Dame much differently than they did before. You can still get an eighth guy in the box, but now your free safety is put in a much bigger bind because and your corners are put in a much bigger bind because in the past, that free safety could sit right in the middle and know that I'm defending some sort of seam, some sort of late over-the-top throw. Now there's going to be far more of the offense built around attacking outside. And what you're going to see from a Mike Denbrock offense is a lot more levels to what they do. Not levels concept. That's a very unique concept. But what I mean is attacking on levels. So a lot more horizontal stretches. And so you're going to see a lot more vertical stuff with guys coming across, threatening the safety position in a much different way than they have in the past. That forces teams to widen and get more depth in how they defend Notre Dame post-snap. So what does that mean for the tight end position? That means the tight end position is now going to have more opportunities to be in less condensed boxes, right? And if teams are going to then have to say, okay, well, we have to really prepare to defend on the outside and vertical, but we still need to make sure we're shutting down the run, that means you're going to get more run fits or run stunts. You're going to get more safeties crashing down. Again, opening up the seams for the tight ends to now be more effective. And if you have watched any of the breakdown videos I've done so far about Mike Denbrock offense, you'll see that there's some stuff in there where the tight ends are ripping teams up the seams at LSU. Well, that's going to get into situations where you watch this offense and you say, okay, this looks a lot different. And so now I think the overall targets for tight end may actually go down a bit. Well, I don't know if that's the right way to say it. They may not be the focal point of what the offense is by itself. The targets may go down a tad, but what you're going to see is a more effective tight end position, a tight end position that gets close to averaging 13, 14, maybe even 15 yards per play with the type of players that Notre Dame has at that position. Now, last year, Mitchell Evans was actually pretty good in that regard, but you're going to see that be more consistent at Notre Dame because of how they're going to defend the rest of the field. If here's the thing, this is only true if the outside receivers perform at a higher level. Because if they don't, I'll put it like this. I've defended the wide receiver room. I have. I've said they're not as bad as people think. I've also criticized it because they're not good enough. There's a happy medium in this conversation that needs to be had. But here's the reality of it. Even with the things I've said about the room in the past, if I'm going in to defend Notre Dame and I've got corners like Notre Dame has had, Ohio State has, Georgia has, on a regular basis, Clemson's had on a regular basis, I'm going to say, hey, listen, we're going to lock you up outside and our safeties are going to be really geared on stopping the run. And I'm going to make you beat us outside. That's what I would have done to Notre Dame. I'd have done it to them in 18 early on. They got, then when they proved themselves, okay, now we got to defend Notre Dame differently because I've got to worry about Boykin and Claypool. I'd have done it in 2019. I'd have said, look, we're going to take Chase Claypool out, and then we're going to make those other receivers beat us. And in 2020, certainly, okay, what do I want? Who do I want a game plan for? The tight ends and Kyron Williams or Javon McKinley and Ben Skoranek? I'm going to game plan to stop Kyron Williams and the tight ends and the offensive line. You're going to have to beat me with Javon McKinley and Ben Skoranek. 2021, same thing. 2022, same thing. 2023, same thing. And right now, if I'm a defense, if I'm A&M and I'm getting ready to go play Notre Dame, same thing. Like, because think about who their coach is. It's Mike Elko. Well, what did Mitchell Evans do against Duke last year? He ripped them up. He ripped Duke up. They couldn't defend him last year. So they're going to be prepared for that, which means the outside receivers have to perform. Because if teams are going to defend – how teams defend Notre Dame in November, in August and September should look a lot different than how teams defend them in November. And if it doesn't, that's a problem because it means they haven't made teams pay. And that's where I say the receiving corps has got a lot of expectations on their plate. And I'm going to get down into like the specifics of how you get there and all that. But I felt a big picture conversation was needed because part of the reasons I've defended the receiving corps in the past is because they weren't expected to be better or more of a focal point, and they will now, which means the play has to be better. Even if I'm right about the receiving corps, and I believe that I am, if I'm right about the receiving corps from the last couple of years, they're not nearly as bad as people think that they've been. They were a good, solid group, and whenever you had a quarterback that would actually get them the ball, they would go make plays. Correct? Even if that's correct, that's not good enough for what this offense is going to be. That's a fact. So it just can't be more of the same, but you got a better quarterback now that hopefully gets you the ball. Now it's, hey, yes, you've got a quarterback that you hope can get you the ball, and that's going to be for years to come. After Riley Leonard, you've got Kenny Minchie, Steve Angeli, CJ Carr, Deuce Knight coming down the pike, right? But it's going to have to be you have to raise your level of play, and you have to be a group that teams have to game plan for. You can't just be like what Clemson did, and Clemson's just going to say, hey, we're going to put our corners on your outside receivers, and they're not going to be able to do a dang thing. Now, they got open more than you'd like, but they weren't wide open. They were open enough where the ball should have come out. Now, could they have made those plays? Different conversation for a different day. But they're going to be asked to do a lot more now. And if they don't raise their level of play, if they don't become better off the line, if they don't become better with their route running, if they don't become better at winning contested throws, if they don't become better just overall winning in general, because receiver, there's three aspects to winning. There's winning off the line, there's winning throughout your stem, and then there's winning when the ball's in the air. That doesn't just mean contested throws. That could also mean your angle of attacking the ball. That means your body positioning. If you're on a deep ball and you've got a guy inside, you've got to play your body in a certain way that prevents him from getting to it. There's all types of things that go into that, and they didn't win enough at receiver. They just didn't, and they're going to have to do that now. Not only just to be better, they're going to be asked to win a lot more. And so when I look at this group, what do I need to see from the 24 group to reach that level? A couple things. Number one, they got to be more consistent. There were games last year where they played really well and games they didn't, and they got to eliminate some of those games where the biggest one is just not fighting for the ball. They were very poor at fighting for the ball last year. Very poor. That's one area where they were not good. They were better route runners than people give them credit for. They got open more than people gave them credit for. But this was not a group that was very good at all at fighting for the football. I mean, think back to all the contested catches that you saw last year. You had a couple from Chris Tyree. The rest of them were what? It was Mitchell Evans. It was Eli Raridon making a diving touchdown grab against Wake Forest. It was not the receiving core. You've got to be better there. You've got to be more consistent with your execution and with your effort and with the end result. The other part of it is you've got to force defenses to plan for them by making them pay for what they do early. And I talked about this a lot. Teams are going to say, we're going to stop Mitchell Evans. We're going to stop the run game. That is what Texas A&M's game plan is going to be. Mike Elko knows how good Riley Leonard is as a runner. He knows how good Mitchell Evans is as a pass catcher because they have both done damage to his defenses, with Riley Leonard doing it in practice and with Mitchell Evans ripping his defense up last year. So they're going to game plan to stop those two things. You're going to see condensed boxes. They're going to basically say, your receivers, we're going to put you one-on-one because we don't think your receivers can beat our corners. They got to make them pay for that. They got to make Purdue pay for that. They got to make Louisville pay for that in ways that they have not in the past. That's a big thing, is punish run-oriented defenses. Make them pay. If they want to disrespect you, and I do believe it is disrespect, not in a sense of there being like improper. I mean, disrespect isn't like you talk back to your father. That's a different type of disrespect. It's a literal lack of, I don't respect you as a unit, so we're going to game plan for other things. It's disrespectful. And if they don't make teams pay for that early, then this offense is going to be limited on just how good it can be. It'll be a lot like last year. It'll be a better version of last year, but it'll be a lot like last year. They're going to rip up like 8 to 9 teams on the schedule. And then there's going to be other 4 or so that just, you're okay, but you're just not good enough. You got to punish those teams. You got to play better. And that gets you to the final point, ties into the final point, which is the big game production's got to be better. I mean, this goes back to even when the receiving cores were talented. The 2018 group, you have to be better. You have to be better than you were against Clemson. You have to be better than you were against, certain Georgia in 2019. You have to be better than what you were against Clemson in 2015. You have to be better than what you were against Ohio State in 2015. The big game issues with the receiving core go back a long time. That's got to change. For this group to get over the hump, that's got to change. You have to take it to the next level. And if we don't see that, then this receiving core might be better because it's more talented than it's been in recent years, but the level of play, the level of execution won't be different. Like, there's a universe in which this receiving core is far more productive than last year, but overall the unit's not any better big picture. The production's going to be better because it's a different offense. The production is going to be better because the talent is more experienced and better. But the level of play, as far as, okay, are they a championship caliber group or not? The answer is still going to be no, because they haven't raised their level of play in the biggest moments. That's going to be a big, big aspect of it. So that's sort of setting the stage for what is expected of the receiving core, why expectations should be raised this year. It's not expectation being raised because I think they're going to be good. It's expectation, hey, I know what this offense is, and I know how important production from the outside receivers and the slot receivers are to this offense, because Mike Denbrock is not an outside-oriented coach, not an inside-oriented coach. He's a balanced, spread the ball around. We're going to find ways to hurt you from the slot. I mean, their top pass concept is the slot fade. That's literally meant to go to the slot guy. They've got a ton of stuff built in for all 3 positions, and they're all going to get fed this year. So are they going to play well enough to raise that level? That's what we're going to find out. But the expectation is there for them to get to that point in time. If this team is going to reach its full potential, this unit has to be as good, if not better, than I think they're going to be. All right, part 2 of today's show. Let's talk about the actual receiving cores as some specifics, right? We talked big picture. We talked about, where things are, what they need to do, big picture. Well, okay, that's fine. But do they have the pieces in place to get there? I could say to you a lot of things like, hey, we need to get this done. We need to do that. Hey, I want to build a new addition onto my house. Cool. I want that to happen. All right, but do I have the pieces in place to make it happen? Do I have the infrastructure? Do I have the supplies? Do I have the people that can get it done? Okay, well, right now I found the people. Well, what's the level? What's the quality of the people? Is it just going to be it's going to get done? It's going to be kind of shoddy, but it's going to get done. Or is it going to be like, okay, it's going to get done. It's going to get done well. That's kind of where this conversation comes into it. So there's really 3 aspects to what needs to happen or different ways to break the roster down. And then a fourth group that's sort of a cherry on top type of group. And we're gonna dive down into each of them. And I'm gonna start honestly with the newcomers. I'm gonna start the transfers. And the reason I'm gonna start the transfers and not the returners is because I don't think this receiving core can reach its full potential if their transfers don't step up. And the reason I say that is because if none of the transfers came, Notre Dame would put a receiving core together, but I'd have more question marks about the makeup of it. Okay, there's a lot of really good slot type of guys, but is there really anybody that's a good outside player? Okay, we got a couple returners that are outside guys, but they're injury prone. They haven't stepped up in big ways. One of those guys is probably better suited to kind of be a ZX type of player, or a ZF type of player. But the outside part of the offense just is a little concerning. Do you have the personnel in place in your veteran classes to do that? And you'd have to rely on your freshmen. Micah Gilbert and Cam Williams would have to play as rookies if the newcomers didn't come. So then you flip it, take the opposite approach. If the transfers made up the entire starting lineup, it would fit much better than taking the three best returners and trying to put them into an offense. Because if you say who are the three best returners, let's just say hypothetically that we all agree that the three best returners are Jaden Greathouse, Jaden Thomas, and Jordan Faison. And I think most of us would agree with that. I mean, you can make a case for Deion Colsey because of his talent, or KK Smith because he's a burner. But these are the three proven-ish guys. Okay, but the problem is all three of those guys are kind of better suited for one position. They're all the best position for Greathouse, Faison, and Jaden Thomas is the slot. Well, when you look at the transfer class, Bo Collins can play all over, but Bo's best position, in my opinion, is in this offense is that boundary spot, doing a lot of the stuff that that Bryan Thomas did last year. Chris Mitchell can play slot. He can play some boundary in some certain looks, but he's a Z. He's a field outside corner. That's where he's best at. And then Jaden Harrison's a pure slot, right? And so that group actually formulates a more complementary starting lineup than what the returners do. You need outside production in this. I just spent how long breaking down the need for outside production? Well, most of your really impactful potential outside guys are the newcomers. And so I think it's got to start there, because if this group isn't as good as Notre Dame hopes it is, then this offense is going to struggle to reach its full potential. And I'm primarily talking about the two outside guys that are more that we do talk about more. And so I'm going to begin with Chris Mitchell and what the expectations are for him. You're talking about a guy that's coming off a really just a great season at Florida International this past year. You're talking about a guy that, had over 60 catches. I'm actually going to pull up his production right now. He had over 60 catches, over 1,100 yards, and 6 touchdowns last year for Florida International. Now, if you know a lot about Florida International, they weren't very good last year. They were a team that went 4-8. They were terrible on offense last season. They only averaged 20 points per game. And I remember watching some of the film and just be like, man, this team is not good on offense. And they finished 117th in scoring last season. And then you watch their run game, and it's like, that's not very good. They average less than 100 yards per game. And you look at their receiving core, and you're like, there's not a lot there outside of this one kid that I'm watching for the first time. This number 10 that everybody keeps telling me about. And I watch them play, and I'm thinking, defense knows what's coming, and they couldn't stop it. He caught 64 passes last year. That's over 25% of their total production. They only had 220 total catches last year. His 1,100 yards is about 40%. Actually, let me do the actual math here real quick. You guys know how I am. I got to get the specifics. So his 1,118 yards was out of the team only throwing for 2,779 yards. That's literally 40% of the overall production. His 6 receiving touchdowns is literally half of that team's entire pass game touchdown percentage. They had 12 passing touchdowns on the year. He had 6 of them. So he's a kid that was part of a bad offense, and everybody knew what was going to happen, and he still went out and made plays. And the other thing I like about Chris Mitchell, too, factors into what needs are for Notre Dame. Notre Dame needs more big play weapons outside, consistent big play weapons. I mean, Tobias Merriweather was one of Notre Dame's best big play weapons last year. He led their regulars in yards per catch. He was over 20 yards per catch last year. He only caught 14 passes. You need that type of big play production, but you need it more consistently. And Chris Mitchell is a guy that you're going to ask to do that. As I said, the outside positions are going to be very important to this defense or this offense. You're going to see a lot of in-breaking routes. You're going to see a lot of, you got to win on the outside. You've got to win on comebacks. You got to win on stops. You got to win on goes. You got to win on posts. You got to win on overs. You got to get open, over the middle of the field on some high-low type of concepts. You've got to win a lot. And when you look at what Chris Mitchell did last season, he did a lot of those things. He showed, even though he's a skinny guy, he showed he can, he's not afraid to catch the ball in traffic. There was a touchdown pass reception he had. I think it was against, I don't know if it was against Maine or UConn, but he catches a ball over the middle and there's three guys kind of closing in on him. And he kind of makes the grab, like not even worried about it, ends up splitting the defense and going for a long play. But the other thing I like about Chris Mitchell, when you look at it, is he's a guy that was really at his best in some of the bigger games last year. There were really three teams that they played last year that were really good football teams. Or at least either really good or at a higher level than what they were. So the two really good teams they played, well, let's say three. They played Liberty last year, who went 13-1 and made it to the Fiesta Bowl. They played Jacksonville State last year, who won 9 games last season and won a bowl game last year. And then they played Western Kentucky, who was an 8-win team. One of their losses to Ohio State. Another loss was to Troy, who was a very good football team that won 10 games last season. 11 games last season. They lost by 3 points to Troy. They lost by 3 points to Jacksonville State. They got beat by Liberty, and they lost to New Mexico State, who last season also won 10 games. So, this is a quality football team, Western Kentucky. And you look at what he did against those teams. So again, the somewhat on their level, but the best of their level. Against Liberty, he had 4 catches for 89 yards, 22.3 per catch. Against Jacksonville State, he had 5 catches for 109 yards and a touchdown. And against Western Kentucky, he had 8 catches for 116 yards and a touchdown in that game as well. Then they went up a level against one opponent, and that was Arkansas. They went on the road and played Arkansas. Arkansas was not a very good Power 5 team last year. They went 4-8 last season. But they are still a talented team. And you look at where their pass defense was last year. Their pass defense was a lot better than it was in previous years. It wasn't great, but it was better than it had been in past seasons. So, so what does he do? What does he goes? Chris Mitchell goes out there against his team with SEC talent. We always hear about SEC talent. SEC talent is good. Number 32 pass defense in college football, and Chris Mitchell has 6 catches for 157 yards in that game. Right. So you're talking about when the lights were brightest. This is a kid that went out there and dominated. Like, yes, he went out there against a Maine team, which is an FCS team, and had 9 catches for 201 yards. Right? Okay, yeah, he ripped them up pretty good. He got after that team pretty good. But it wasn't padding stats against bad teams. He didn't go out there against New Mexico State was the other team that they played against last season. That was a pretty good team. I should probably mention New Mexico State. They won 10 games last year, and he had 8 catches for 91 yards against New Mexico State. So literally every time they played a good team, Chris Mitchell had his best games. There's only one game that I would consider one of his quote-unquote best games that he didn't perform well. They beat UConn last year at 2 catches for 73 yards and a touchdown. So when you look at the production, he was clutch when it mattered most for his team. Now, he went on the road against an SEC team in front of a big crowd and performed very well. Those things matter to me. Having said that, you also can't ignore the fact that he's now going to be playing in front of consistently bigger audiences on a much bigger stage because of the pressure that comes with being in Notre Dame. Yes, he went on the road against 60,000 fans in an SEC stadium and ripped that defense up. And if you look at it, a lot of his production came in the first half when the game was still in doubt. So this wasn't like he went out there and put up a bunch of yards in the second half against the second team for Arkansas. He did that, a lot of it early in the game. And then Arkansas was like, yeah, we're not going to let that guy beat us anymore. So can he translate what he did at Florida International to Notre Dame? Can he be a big game guy? He was a big game guy at Florida International against the best teams on earth, Liberty, New Mexico State, Jacksonville State, Western Kentucky. But let's be honest, it's a big game for them, but it's a whole different now going down to Kyle Field in College Station, Texas, and doing it in front of 112,000 people. It's twice as many people going to be there almost as what was at the game in Arkansas. Can he do it in front of a live national TV audience, 7:30 p.m. in November, with hopefully a playoff spot on the line against Florida State? Can he do it against Louisville, against one of the best cornerbacks in college football in Quincy Riley? Can he do it against them? Can he do it on the road against USC in the Coliseum? That's a question. And then if he's able to do all that, that's great. But now can he do it against Georgia? Can he do it against Denzel Burke and Ohio State in the playoff? Can he do it against Texas? Can he do it against those type of teams? We don't know. We don't know the answer to that. But what we do know is he's fast. He has production. He was a bit of a late bloomer, so he never really had a breakout really until last year. Byproduct of the offense to a degree. If you go back and watch some of his 2022 film, he was getting open quite a bit, but they just didn't get him the football. There's a lot of things you say, okay, this should translate, that should translate, that should translate, that should translate. But now it's about you got to show me. So I can sit here and tell you guys all these great things about Chris Mitchell. And I would hope with my background, having coached this position, coached All-Americans at this position, that you say, well, this is a position you kind of know something about. Some of you will, some of you won't. That's okay. But at the end of the day, even if you listen to me and believe that Chris Mitchell has those skills, Chris Mitchell now has to prove that those skills can translate and perform on the bigger stages. We don't know if he can do that. But his arrival to me was very important. And I'll be honest, I'm shocked we don't talk about him more. We talk about him, but I'm shocked he's not more of a focal point on the message boards. I'm shocked he's not talked about more on social media. And I'm shocked he's not talked about more in the chat. I mean, Bo Collins, who's a good football player, and I'll get to him next, gets way more conversation than Chris Mitchell, when in reality, Chris Mitchell's a far more established player than Bo Collins. Well, I think that's because he came from Florida International. And as fans, we obsess over what we know. We know Clemson. We know Bo was a top 100 player. There's that, so we obsess on that. And then we kind of, is he going to be able to go to this next level? I don't know. I think he has a chance to be, because he was really good at that level, and he's done it against teams that have Power 5 talent. And so, my thing is, I believe he's a kid that absolutely has that ability to perform at that level. I'm not worried about him. Somebody in the chat, does he have the frame? He gets bigger. He's bigger than Devontae Smith was. He's bigger than a lot of guys that have dominated this level. I'm not worried about that. At receiver, that's fine. This isn't 1985 where you're getting laid out by Steve Atwater. Actually, it should be 1995 where you're getting laid out by Steve Atwaters and Chuck Cecils and Ronnie Lotts and Rod Woodsons and guys like that. The game's not Sean Taylor's. The game's not played that way. And so, this is a different game. This is a fast, this is a speedy game, and he's got the ability to do that, but he's got to show they can do it when it matters. Then you get to Bo Collins. This is a guy that there's an assumption with Notre Dame fans he's going to play well. And I know my guy Tommy Guns in the chat loves him some Bo Collins. He feels about Bo Collins how Salty Virginia Peanuts feels about Jaden Greathouse. And I get it. Look, Bo's a kid that as Notre Dame fans we've known about for a while. He's a kid that Notre Dame recruited out of high school. He's a kid that was a top 100 player. He was a high school teammate of DJ Uiagalelei. I understand why there's an excitement about Bo Collins, because had he signed out of high school, he would have been a huge pickup for Notre Dame, and I think would have been a much better player. I've been saying this for years. Bo Collins, I felt, made a mistake from a football standpoint. Now, I don't know what kind of young man he became at Clemson. I mean, it could have been the best thing for him as far as growing into being a man, that he really grew up a lot. And when you think about the rest of his life, it was good for him to go there, because I'm not arguing any of that. I don't know that. But what I'm simply looking at from a football standpoint is I said it then, I said it each year. I've said it every time Notre Dame's gone to play Clemson. We talk about Bo Collins, and I said, I just don't understand why he went there, because it's just not the right fit for what he does. They did not use him the way that he should have been used, in my opinion. So now he comes to Notre Dame, and he's going to play in an offense that, to me, is much better suited for his skill set. Bo is sort of a vertically oriented guy. Not that he's and I don't mean that like he's a burner and he's just, this really dynamic athlete. He's a good athlete. What I mean vertical is a lot of the stuff he's going to thrive on are more vertically oriented concepts, comebacks, deep ends, slants, posts, verticals. He's not a guy that you're gonna say, hey, look, this guy's gonna shake you a lot, and he's a guy that's gonna go out there and have this really shiftiness, and you've got to design this screen to him and that screen to him. And I'm watching Clemson throw like now screens to Bo Collins, and I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you like? That's not where you want to have him make his living. It's okay to do it from time to time, but Bo needs a guy that needs to be attacking the defense vertically. And when I look at Bo, I see a guy that is more suited for a pro style offense as opposed to the college spread that Clemson uses. I mean, look, college football 2025 came out, right? We've all started playing it. And what often you want, West Coast, pro style, spread, whatever. A spread offense is that traditional spread where, obviously you're going to have vertical stuff, but it's, slots and outside guys and trips and 3x1. And it's a lot of quick stuff, a lot of quick game, a lot of now screens, a lot of RPOs. There's just a lot of things that, he'll do the things you ask in Notre Dame, but it's not the stuff that's emphasized. Now, he's going to get to do a lot more of that stuff. The dig route, backside dig routes, backside comebacks, backside stops, go routes on the outside. Some slot fade stuff where you can even put him in the slot, which Clemson or LSU did under Mike Denbrock. Every single receiver would get some slot fade attempts. Bryan Thomas got slot fade attempts. Kyron Lacey got slot fade attempts. Chris Hilton got slot fade attempts. And, of course, Malik Neighbors got hot slot fade attempts because they'll move guys around. And Bo can do some of that. But Bo's going to do a lot more of the vertical type of stuff when off the line. You think about him screwing Benjamin Morrison around last year on a slant route to convert it to third down and set up a score. That was, okay, that's what you want a boundary receiver to be able to do. And Bo brings a lot of that. He's going to be asked to do a lot more of that now at Notre Dame, and he has enough film to say, hey, look, this guy can win. If you go back and watch some of them, I think somebody put a highlight on the board the other day. And I'll ask somebody to do now if there's anybody that's kind of like watching the show and also on the message board, go find some of Bo Collins' highlights on YouTube and put those on the message board. Somebody did that recently, but you guys can go back and look at that. This is a kid that has some of those performances where you say, hey, look, if this guy can do that against this team, he's going to be pretty good. His production against Notre Dame last year wasn't like nothing. It's something that's going to blow you away. And 3 catches for 37 yards. But when you watch that film, you say, okay, this kid was making play. This kid was getting open. Quarterbacks didn't throw him the football. You go back to his freshman year and, having 100 yards in a game against Louisville, playing Wake Forest, who at the time was ranked in the borderline top 10 team. That was the year that Wake Forest played for the ACC title. Bo goes out and has 4 catches for 137 yards that season. So this is a young man that's had to play on a big stage. He's had to play in big moments. He's played at Notre Dame Stadium before, right? He's had to play at Florida State. He's had to play at Louisville. He's played in multiple bowl games. He played in a big bowl game 2 years ago against – well, actually, he didn't play in that game against Tennessee. He was part of the team. This is a guy that's played on a big stage, some big moments. And now he's got a chance to do it in Notre Dame. So of all the transfers, he's the guy that I feel you most – like you think the transition is going to be the easiest for him because he has played against this level of talent. He has played on this type of stage before. So mentally, you think Bo's transition is going to be smooth. Now it's about, okay, can Bo, A, stay healthy? Because that's been a big concern for Bo Collins. But can he take his game to another level? What is Bo Collins going to be? Well, my response is if Bo just does what he did last year, that's fine. Last year, Bo was 38 catches, 510 yards, and 3 touchdowns. That's pretty good boundary position, as part of a boundary rotation. If that's what one of the members of the boundary rotation does next year, okay, I'm good. Just repeat what you did last year. The expectation, however, is that some people have is that Bo has another gear to get to. I think he's capable of that. Will he do it? I don't know. But I think Bo is capable of being – honestly, I'll say this. If you want people like comparisons, if you want to know what I think Bo Collins is capable of at Notre Dame this season, is go look at Miles Boykin in 2018. There's some similarities in their style of play, but even more so what it is, it's just about when I think about the comparison, it's yes, there's some physical comparisons between Miles and Bo. What I'm referring to, however, is more of the statistical comparison. I don't know that Bo's going to be able to go out there. I don't know if Bo is good enough to do this, And I don't know if the offense is going to be will allow him to do this, but like I don't see like a Chase Claypool 2019 type of season. 66 catches, 1,000+ yards, 13 touchdowns. I don't know if Bo has that in him. Be nice if he does. But what I certainly think he's able to do from a production standpoint is similar to what Miles did in 2018, which is like 59 catches for 872 yards over the course of a season. Average, around 15 yards per catch. I think Bo Collins is capable of that. There's no question about that from a production standpoint. Again, some of you in the chat immediately jumped to comparing him to Miles. I said I'm not comparing him to Miles as a player. There's some similarities, but I'm not comparing anything. I'm not comparing their personalities. I'm comparing position they play and the statistical production. That's all that I'm focusing on. If Bo Collins can get there or even close to there, if he can be a 45+ catch guy, average 15+ yards per catch. So 45 at 15 would get him like 675. So if he's like a 45 to 675 guy or more, that means this offense is going to, in my opinion, is going to be really good, and this receiver position is going to get a huge boost because Bo is probably the most natural proven receiver for that boundary spot because he's 6'3", he's 215+. He is a guy that's got some strength to him. He's not like a real strong guy, but he's got some strength to him. He's not a guy that I view as like a burner, but he's got good speed. He's a very good athlete. He's savvy. He understands the game. If he can get to that level of production, that's going to be very good for that position because it's going to tell me that they have at least one guy that's a natural boundary that produces. And when I talk about those numbers, I'm talking about the 12+1, the regular season plus maybe one playoff game. If he can provide you with that, then you're gonna feel very good about that position. And if Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins both give Notre Dame at least 40 touches this year or 40 catches, that's going to be really good. And then Bo is around 15 yards a catch. Let's just say Bo catches 40 for 15 a catch, so that's 40 catches for 600 yards. Let's say Chris Mitchell goes for 40 catches, and let's say he averages just kind of what he did last year. Let's say it's just 17.6 yards per catch. That gets him at 700 yards. So you got 40 catches for Bo at 600, 40 catches for Chris Mitchell at 700. Then you're going to have what Jaden Greathouse is going to do, what Jordan Faison is going to do, what Jaden Thomas is going to do, KK Smith, and then, of course, the tight ends and the running back. So, the ball's going to be spread around a lot. If those two guys can give you minimum 40 catches and then, be impactful, that's going to be really good. Anything beyond that, you start saying, okay, this team is really, really dangerous. I don't expect these guys to be asked to do what the LSU kids did last year. I don't expect them to go out and have the kind of production that LSU had last year with their top receivers. And when you look at, Malik Neighbors last year led them in catches with 89 for 1,569 yards, 14 touchdowns. Bryan Thomas had 68 catches, 1,177 yards, and 17 touchdowns. The reason I don't expect that is because if you look at the rest of their offense, you had two other guys that have over 30 catches. Kyron Lacey had 30. Mason Taylor had 36. Then only three other players are above 10. You had Aaron Anderson, who was a freshman receiver, had 12. You had a running back, John Williams, had 14, and Chris Hilton only had 13 catches. That's it. I'll be shocked if there's only 7 guys in Notre Dame with more than 10 catches. I think there's a better chance there's more than 7. There's 7 guys with maybe 20 or more catches because I believe the ball is going to get spread around a lot more in 2024 at Notre Dame than it was at 23 at LSU for a number of reasons. I could maybe see something similar to what we saw in 2022 from LSU, where they passed the ball for 3,700 yards that year, and you had Malik Neighbors had 1,000 yards. I don't think he was going to have that, but you had 48, 38, 27, 31, 24, 21, 16, and 13 was your next level of catches. You had 4 total guys over 400 yards, 5 guys over 300 yards, 7 guys with over 200 yards. You had 10 different players with over 100 yards receiving. You're going to see something closer to that production-wise than what you saw at LSU last year, in my opinion. Just more spread around. So when I talk about 40 catches for Bo and Chris as the minimum ideal, that tells me that they transition just fine. And then, of course, you're going to have the tight end and the other position. So, like, to me, Bo has to be healthy. He has to put it all together and give them a legitimate boundary weapon, something that right now we don't know that this team has. And that's going to be what I'm expecting from Bo Collins. Let's move on to the final transfer, Jaden Harrison. Honestly, he's a bit of a wild card for me. Jaden Harrison has really not made much of an impact at wide receiver his entire career at Marshall. If you look at last season, he was their team's leader in receiving yards with 410. He was second on the team in catches. He only had 28 catches last year. And if you look at the way the season went down, he had 6 catches, which is almost 25%, just under 25% of his catches in one game. He had 6 against UTSA in a bowl game. He had almost a third of his yards, just under a third of his total yards were in that game as well, 132. So in the bowl game against UTSA, he went for 6 for 132. The rest of the season, he only had 2 games where he went above 3 catches. That was against James Madison and Georgia State. And he had 0 games where he got to 50 yards receiving. 0. And if you look at his entire career at Marshall, he's had 3 games in his career where he went above 50 yards receiving. He had a game for 81 against NC Central a couple years ago, back in 2021. He had 4 catches for 81 yards. He went for 65 that year at UAB. The next 2 years, he only did it 1 time, and it was the most recent game that he played. And then at Vanderbilt in 2020, he caught 8 passes, but it was for 20 yards. So it was a lot of now screens, quick stuff, things like that. So when I look at Jaden Harrison, I don't know what to expect from him. My primary focus on Jaden Harrison is as a kick returner. That's the impact I want him to make. Be an impact kick returner, be a dynamic kick returner, just like you were at Marshall last year. And then that allows Notre Dame to kind of focus on having Jadarian Price be more of a running back and not give you that. And I'm fine if Jadarian wants to do that again, but I want Jadarian focusing his time and energy and reps on playing running back. And then Jaden Harrison can be that impact return man. Anything he gives me on offense, honestly, at this point in time, is a bonus. If he gives me anything more than 10 catches on offense, that's a bonus. Notre Dame is pretty loaded at that position. But at the same time, you say, boy, this guy's really fast. Well, he was that fast at Marshall, and it never translated into being an impact receiver. The fact is just being fast and athletic doesn't mean that you can play receiver. And unfortunately, we didn't see a ton of Jaden in the spring. He impressed with his athleticism, going through drills and routes during the early part of spring, but then he got hurt and he missed the rest of spring practice. So we didn't get a chance to really see it on a full level. So my expectations for Jaden this year are not incredibly high just because he's a bit of an unknown as a wide receiver. And so I just need to see him perform. He didn't do a whole lot. Like Chris Mitchell came over from a similar level, but he dominated that level. I mean, he was a 1,000-yard guy. Chris Mitchell or Jaden Harrison really in the 3 years has had 1 good game as a wide receiver. Now, he shows some athleticism. He certainly shows speed. There's some potential there, better offenses, better plays around him. I get all that. But he's the one guy that's just the biggest unknown to me. I love the talent. I love the athleticism, but I just don't know what kind of receiver he is right now because there's just not a lot of evidence that he can be that guy. Bo Collins has evidence of that at the Power 5 level. Chris Mitchell showed he can dominate the Group of 5 level. Jaden Harrison has shown he can be an elite kick returner. Anything beyond that's it's kind of gravy. To be honest with you, I don't know that I can expect a whole lot more from him at this point in time. Now, does that mean he's not capable of more? I'm definitely not saying that because he's a strongly built kid. You see the ability to do things with the ball in his hands as a kick returner. You'd be crazy not to at least try to figure out a way to get that built into your offense somehow. So I could certainly see a universe where Jaden Harrison is far more impactful at Notre Dame than he was at Marshall or Vanderbilt. I'm not saying that can't happen. I'm simply saying, being realistic, it's hard for me to project that when he's never shown it. Like with Mitchell, it's about, okay, I've seen him dominate, but can he do that, what he did at FIU and even against Arkansas? Can he do that at Notre Dame? I've seen Bo be dominant against Power 5 teams. The question now is, okay, can he stay healthy and can he do it consistently? With Jaden Harrison, I saw him play 1 good game against Texas San Antonio in a bowl game as a receiver. And so it's just hard for me to say, okay, I'm expecting him, having never done it at the Group of 5 level outside of 1 game, to come to Notre Dame and dominate. That's an unfair expectation for Jaden. So anything you get from him on offense is a bonus. What I want to see from him is what he has shown. which is he can be an impact kick returner. If he can do that, I'm happy. That's a great pickup if he can just do that. And then whatever gives you an offense, it's just like, okay, that's a little something extra special for me. Let's move into the sophomore class. This is a group that is going to be very interesting to see because really the three sophomores, we're talking about Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, and KK Smith. You could make a case that all three of them's best position is the same one slot. Now, I think KK can do more outside. I think Jaden Greathouse can do more outside. I don't think Jaden Greathouse is a guy that you want playing the boundary all the time, but as a Z, sure, he can play that at a high level, in my opinion. As a slot, he can definitely play that at a high level. He showed that last year. And if you think about it, if you go back and look at Notre Dame's production last year, their two best touchdown makers at wide receiver were the two sophomores. So last year, Notre Dame's leader in touchdown receptions last year was Jaden Greathouse. The number two guy in touchdown receptions last year, it was a tie between Holden Stace and Jordan Faison. Well, Jordan Faison only played 7 games. And obviously Jaden Greathouse was never missed a game. Well, he missed 1 game. But he was a guy that answered the bell week after week, but he was just he wasn't himself. So he had, if you look at Jaden's production last year, he had 12 catches in the first 5 games, went through a 5-game stretch where he did not catch a single pass, and they caught 6 in the final 3 games. So I think the guy we saw early and late is much more in line with who Jaden Greathouse was last year than the injury period. But Jaden showed in the spring he can be that guy. He was by far their best receiver in the Jersey scrimmage. He didn't get targeted as much in the blue gold game, and I think that was intentional. I think that was part of Notre Dame's plan, was to not really show him a lot. He was flat out a focal point in the Jersey scrimmage and was impactful and should have had an even. I think I had him down for like 5 or 6 catches for like 90 yards. He was wide open a couple times and the ball didn't come his way. He was dominant in that performance, and he was great all spring. He's a guy that might have the best volume potential on the roster right now. What I mean by that is, can you have a guy that's a 60-plus catch guy? I don't know that you're going to have that. I know somebody in the chat is earlier is like, I need someone that's at, what was the number it was provided? It was, I need someone who's at 60, 90, 10 guy. And that's fine. It's nice to have that. I just don't think it's needed. And so when I look at this team, I say, look, yeah, if somebody steps up and emerges as that's awesome. That means that guy's really good. But I don't think you need that kind of guy. I mean, you look at Michigan last year in 15 games. In 15 games, their leading receiver had 48 catches. They had 6 guys with over 20. Their leading receiver only had 789 yards. He had 12 touchdowns, but that's in 15 games, right? So, and their number 2 guy in receiving yards was a tight end. When you look at the talent Notre Dame has at the other positions, a tight end, a running back, in the pass game, it's going to be harder. And then you look at the depth that you have at wide receiver, it's going to be hard for somebody to step up with a Will Fuller type of season. I don't know that anybody's as good as Will Fuller, and I don't know that the offense is going to be that way. I think it's going to be spread around a little bit more, similar to what we saw from Notre Dame in 2018, where nobody stepped up with a 1,000-yard season. Miles Boykin was the team's leading receiver that year, with 59 catches for 872 yards. But you had 4 guys on that offense that caught 36 or more passes, 3 guys with 49 or more catches. And so you saw the ball spread around a little bit more for a team that didn't really throw it a ton at times, only threw for 3,300 yards that year. So I think you're going to see it spread around a little bit more. I think if I was a betting man, I'm not. I don't know a better expression to use than that. But if I was making a prediction, you say, okay, Bryan, you've got to make a pick. You can't hold. You can't do any of that. You have to make a prediction. Who is the guy that breaks out and becomes the guy at receiver, and the guy meaning, 60-plus catches? Who would that be? Greathouse would be my pick, because I think his game is more geared towards that. Where, like with Chris Mitchell, I don't care about volume with Chris Mitchell. The 2 things I care about with Chris Mitchell are big plays and can he get you touchdowns, right? That's what I care about, big, long touchdowns. I care about his yards per catch and his total yards a lot more than I care about his catches. If he gives me 35 catches for 600, 700 yards, I'm thrilled with that. Even if it's 650, what would 650 be for 35 catches? Let's see here. That would be 18.6. So if he's at 35 for 650, I'm thrilled. Give me 5 touchdowns. I'm happy. If Bo Collins gives me, like I said earlier, 40 for 600, I'm gravy. Greathouse is the guy to me that has a chance to be that 60 catch, 800 plus yard guy. And he showed last year he scores touchdowns. So, and that's something he certainly did a ton in high school. He's just got the whole package. He's strong. He's athletic. He's not a burner, but he's faster than I think people maybe think he is. He's got great ball skills, and he just knows how to get open. He's an incredibly experienced player. He's one of the most prolific receivers in the history of Texas football, which is saying something. And he's a guy that just kind of has that, he just kind of carries himself like an elite receiver at what you'd expect an elite receiver at Notre Dame to have, which is not a, mouthy, always talking, always telling everyone how great he is, but just you don't have to say anything. Like the great receivers that I like, I don't mind guys talking trash. I talk trash as a receiver, but it wasn't all the time. You want guys that just kind of their presence is confidence. They just ooze confidence how they go about their business, right? Like that's what I'm talking about is like I want to see a guy like that just has that. Okay, I'm the dude. And for a quarterback, it's huge to have a guy like that. Like Bryan in New York, I think is what that stands for. Is keeps wanting to harp on. I need my 6,900 guy. Dude, I'm not saying that that's not okay. What I'm telling you is that's not needed per se in this offense because I think the ball's going to be spread around a lot. If Notre Dame throws for 4,000 yards this year, I'm not guaranteeing that there's going to be a 1,000-yard receiver. I just don't think that's going to happen because of how much the ball's going to get spread around. I hope it happens. It'd be pretty cool if it happens, but I just think the ball's going to get spread around a lot. That's just the nature of the talent that they have. They have a tight end that's a big-time player. They have running backs that are big-time pass catcher weapons. They have slots. They have outside guys. The ball's going to get spread around a lot. But you need a guy, however, right? You need a guy that is going to go into the season and say, okay, I don't really care what the numbers are, but what I care about is when the numbers happen. As a quarterback, you need a guy that you look at and say, okay, it's 3rd and 5. Who am I going to? It's the last 2 minutes of the half. It's the last 2 minutes of the game. It's they just scored to take a lead in the second half. We have to answer offensively. When you're the quarterback, the question is, who is that guy? And it's great to spread the ball around as part of just a normal part of the offense. That's what's needed. For 90% of the time you're on running offense, it's just read the defense and get the ball where it needs to go. There's going to be about 10% of that time, whether it's a clutch 3rd down, whether it's bouncing back from another team scoring, last 2 minutes, some sort of game on the line situation where you need to know who my guy is. And somebody, in my opinion, and preferably 2 somebodies, steps up in that role. And I don't care. One of them could be Chris Mitchell. I mean, it could be Bo Collins. It could be Mitchell Evans. I mean, and I think that's going to be a part of it if he's healthy is one of the tight ends. But you need somebody that's going to say, hey, look, 3rd and 5, look at me, I'm getting open. And then does it, right? Because every receiver thinks he's that guy. So it's not a false bravado. It's are you that guy? You are that confident because you are that guy. I know I'm going to get open on 3rd and 5. Well, why do you think that? Because I always get open on 3rd and 5 in practice and 1-on-1s in the summer and 7-on-7s in the summer and spring practice and winter workouts. And when I'm back home playing with my friends, I'm that guy. And I think Jaden Greathouse has that ability to be that when the game's in the line, he's your guy. And now we need to see him go out and prove it. That's going to be the next part. So, and then we saw that in the spring. And then, you've got the Jordan Faison fans in the chat now losing their minds because I haven't gotten to Jordan Faison yet. But guys, look, I hate to tell you this. Jordan Faison's a very good football player. He's going to be a very important part of this offense. He's not better than Jaden Greathouse. He's not. He stepped up when they needed him to step up during the season, and he's going to be a great complementary weapon to what Notre Dame has. He's not a number 1 receiver. He's not. And if Notre Dame tries to force him into that role, he's going to be less effective, right? Jordan Faison is going to be very important this season. And I want to see things. One of the questions I have is how is Notre Dame going to get him and Jaden Greathouse on the field together? Okay. How are they going to get Jaden moved around outside, Jordan outside? Because there were times last year, I think it was the long touchdown that Greathouse had against Wake Forest, where they were both outside on opposite sides. Faison ran a post route, and then Greathouse came underneath for a big play. Like, how do they get them on the field together? That's going to be important. How do they do that? The other part of it is, how does Jordan Faison fit into the offense? And if you can find a way to have him be that complementary player, that's when he is dangerous, in my opinion. I don't think he's a focal point kind of guy. He's 5'10". He's got good ball skills, but he's not a guy that you're going to nest. And he's very athletic. He's not a burner. So I don't know if he's going to be a guy that's going to go out there and say, hey, is he going to be your 60 catch, 900 to 1,000 yard guy? No, he's not. And you're going to look back and say, boy, I thought he would produce more than that. But when you look at the production, it was impact production. That's what Jordan Faison brings to the table. It's not so much a volume standpoint. And if you're looking for him to be a volume guy, that's not who he is. What Jordan Faison is he's a playmaker. He's a guy that you say, hey, look, we got to get this ball in space. They're collapsed in the pocket. We need to get that ball out on the perimeter and get somebody to go make a play on it. That's Jordan Faison. We need somebody to win off the line on third down. That's Jordan Faison. We need someone as a team is playing a lot of man coverage. We need somebody that can win, get open, and make a play. That's Jordan Faison. He is part of that group. And so, in my view, I would argue that of what we know, you could make a case that Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison are your top two weapons in those type of situations. So then you have to ask yourself, you can't pitch and hold both of them in the slot because now they're never together. How do you figure out, and this is going to be one of the biggest challenges for Mike Brown, is you've got Chris Mitchell, Bo Collins, Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison. You got to figure out ways to get them all together. And I've even gotten into half the other receiving core. His big challenge is going to be, how do I figure out the right roles for this group? And then part of that's your game plan. You know, Mike Denbrock, hey, when we decide this is what we're going to do, I need to make sure you as a receivers coach is getting the guys in the field when we want to. It's something you decide in between series also. Hey, listen, I'm going to go to this on this next series, and I need Greathouse in here and that. I need Faison in there. I need Bo here. I need Mitchell there. I need whoever there. Those things are going to be. But you got to figure out ways to use them both together. And I'm very curious to see what packages Notre Dame can put together that has those two guys together. Because when you look at Faison, again, not a volume guy, but you're going to take his, let's say he only catches 30 balls next year. Okay, 25, 30 balls next year. And you're going to look at those and you're going to say, you know, he was probably, fifth on the team in catches and maybe fourth in receiving yards and third and fourth in touchdowns. But then you start thinking about Faison's numbers. You're like, man, I thought he produced more than that. Why was his number so low? Because the production he has is going to be impact production. It's going to be stuff you remember. Greathouse is the kind of guy, and Bo Collins is the kind of guy that you look at the stat sheet at the end of the game, like, wow, he had 7 catches for 95 yards or 7 catches for 105 yards. Like, I don't really remember him having 100 yards. Like, he just went out there and played and made plays. That's a volume guy. Then you have the guy that you're like, he only caught 3 balls for 50 yards, but you remember every single one of those catches because they're high leverage catches or they're impact catches. And those are the things that, to me, you look at with Jordan Faison and say he can be that kind of guy. And somebody said, y'all are killing me today. He better catch more than 3 balls a game. Dude, if he catches more than 3 balls a game, he's going to be over 40 catches for a year. You guys, Notre Dame's not throwing the ball 90 times a game. You guys get that, right? Like, you can't have Chris Mitchell catch 50 balls. You can't have Bo Collins catch 50 balls. You can't have Jaden Greathouse catch 50 balls. You can't have Jordan Faison catch 50 balls. You can't have Jaden Thomas catch 50 balls. You can't have Mitchell Evans catch 50 balls. And all of you want them to throw the ball a lot to Jeremiah Love. Like, you do realize that they can't throw the ball that many times to keep those type of numbers for all those players. So what they have to find out, and this is what makes good coaches different than fans, is now in maybe an NCAA, because I can just go out there and, do whatever I want. And I played a game last night where Riley Leonard had 10 touchdowns and 730 passing yards. Okay. So sure, you can do it in a video game, But in real life, you can't throw the ball that many times to make sure everybody that you want has to have 5 catches a game. It's just not realistic. It's just not. We're talking fantasy land now. What you have to figure out a way to do is, okay, however many times this guy touches the ball, whether it's catches-wise, whether it's 2 or 7, it's impactful. And that's what they're going to have to do to Jordan Faison is if Jordan Faison catches the ball 5 times a game, great. I mean, if he's that guy, but I don't think he is. I think he's a complementary weapon that when you put him in with the other pieces, he may not catch the ball as many times as Bo or Jaden or Chris or Jaden Thomas or Mitchell Evans, but you're going to remember a lot of those throws, a lot of them. You're going to remember a lot of those catches because they're going to be clutch. I'll use it as an example when you think of Jordan Faison, right? Like a lot of you probably think he had probably more than 19 catches last year, right? Louisville, he only had 2 catches for 48 yards against Louisville, but they were impactful. They mattered, right? You remember them. Stanford, he had 3 catches for 66 yards. That's it. But they were impactful. You remember them. Yes, he had a big game against Oregon State, against a depleted secondary when their top two cornerbacks didn't play in the game, but he still performed well. He did what he needed to do, and he showed his ability. He'll have games like that. For certain, he'll have games like that. It's just not going to be on the regular. And he's going to be more of a complimentary player, and that is going to be the challenge for Notre Dame. How do you get him in the flow of the game enough and give him the ball enough to where he can be impactful without getting out of a rhythm? That's a lot harder than you might think. And then the last guy in the sophomore class is the most explosive member of this class, and maybe, depending on who you talk to, the most explosive receiver they have, and that's KK Smith. So, every year I do these intel pieces on the message board where I'll talk to all types of different sources around the program. And I'll put together this really long intel piece on, how the summer went, how players are performing, expectations for the year. I've already started working on that. And I always give you guys little teasers. So I give you a teaser. I spoke with someone the other day who's not overly fond of hyperbole. He's a pretty honest guy. He's not a negative guy. He'll just shoot you straight, and if he loves it, he's excited, and if he's not, then he'll tell you. And there's some things he told me that weren't necessarily, oh man, that's not what I wanted to hear. I was hoping I'd hear something different. But when he talks about KK Smith, you can just see it lights up a little bit. He's like, I don't know what kind of role he's going to have, but what I know is he had a great spring, and he's been even better this summer. And this is the phrase, this is the most explosive receiver we have. That's what I was told about KK Smith. Now, what does that mean for production? What does that mean for his role? No idea. But I've been told by this actually surprised me because I knew KK had speed, but I didn't know he had this kind of speed. I thought he's more of a quick than fast kind of guy, at least in high school. I had one person tell me that he's their fastest receiver. Now, if that's true, that's saying something because Chris Mitchell can run and Jaden Harrison can run. And so if KK Smith's your fastest guy, that's telling me something. Now, what we saw from KK in the spring is he is very athletic. There's no doubt about that. But KK's got to get stronger. That's really the thing for me is obviously feel for the offense, but he's got to get stronger. He allowed himself to kind of get pushed around a little bit at times in the spring by guys that were just older, stronger than him and just muscled him up. If KK can get stronger and play stronger, I think he's got a chance to be an impact guy. He may only catch the ball 15 times this year, but it's going to be 15 times for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns, something like that. That's going to be interesting. And that's what I think makes this team a little bit his skill set specifically, I do think makes the role a little easier for Mike Brown in a pure rotation. If it's Chris Mitchell's the number 1 Z and KK Smith's the number 2 Z, they're built the same. They both can run. They can both impact the game the same way. KK actually adds a little bit more after the catch potential than Chris does. But it's easy to just say, hey, look, if you're Riley Leonard, it doesn't matter if Chris Mitchell's in the game or KK Smith's in the game. They both play the game in very similar fashion. We don't have to alter what we're doing because that rotation's happening. Now, you may change a little bit when you put Jay Greathouse out there or Jordan Faison out there. You're not going to ask them to do the same type of vertical stuff as much as those other 2 guys. But when you go from Chris Mitchell to KK Smith, if that's how it ends up shaking out, It's kind of the same guy. Skinny, 6 foot tall, fast, stretch the field kind of guy. That's what KK Smith brings to the table. And he's very different from his two compadres. Now, I think KK can also play in the slot. That's what he was kind of recruited to play, but his speed has taken off a little bit since he got to Notre Dame, and you saw him more as an outside guy this spring. And as an outside guy, he's going to definitely have to get stronger. That's going to be a big, big key for KK Smith. But I absolutely think these 3 players in the sophomore class are essential to Notre Dame taking that next step. I don't think they can reach their full potential with the transfers. I don't. Because I don't think this offense can thrive without consistent performances outside. I just don't think it can. The nature of the offense to me is just that. However, for it to go from really good to over the top, you can win a title because of this group. This sophomore class is the key. And, we kind of I had some fun. I was having some fun with you guys on that Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison thing. I mean, I believe everything I said, but they're both really good players. But here's the thing about it that we should all be able to agree on. What I love about the makeup of this team and the transfers and the sophomores are why that's the case. I'll get to the veterans in a second. One of the concerns that I had going into 23 and 22 and 21 and 20 is there was like that one guy that if he doesn't pan out, you're going to be in trouble. In 2020, if Javon McKinley didn't have a breakout, that receiving core would have been screwed. In 2021, if Kevin Austin doesn't step up, you're screwed. And when Kevin Austin played well, that offense was really good. When Kevin Austin didn't play well, the pass game really struggled. When you look at 2022, if Lorenzo Styles doesn't step up, your pass game is screwed. He didn't, and they were screwed. The 2 previous guys at least stepped up to some degree. In 23, you needed Tobias Merriweather to take that jump as a sophomore. You needed it. And if he didn't, your pass game was going to struggle. He didn't, and your pass game struggled. You had to put Rico Flores in there, and I don't think they should have done this, and try to make him be the guy, and he wasn't ready for that role. Now, I think Rico eventually could become that guy, but he's not that guy. He wasn't that guy in 2023 because and then the other one is if Jaden Thomas and Deion Colsey can't stay healthy, you're in trouble. You were always like a guy or 2 away from if they don't pan out, you're screwed. The thing I love about this receiving core is this. If Jordan Faison is not an impact guy, you're okay because you have Jaden Greathouse. You have KK Smith. You have Chris Mitchell. You have Deion Colsey. You have Bo Collins. You have Deion Colsey. You have Jaden Thomas. You have Cam Williams. You have Micah Gilbert. You have Jaden Harrison. If Jaden Greathouse doesn't step up and play well, okay, that's a bummer. He got hurt or he doesn't play well. But you've got Jordan Faison. You've got KK Smith. You've got Jaden Thomas. You've got Jaden Harrison that can all play that position. If Chris Mitchell gets hurt or doesn't step up, okay, you can play Bo Collins there. You can play Jaden Thomas there. You can play Jaden Greathouse there. You've got KK Smith. You've got Cam Williams. If Bo Collins doesn't step up in the boundary, you've got Jaden Thomas. You've got Bo Collins or Deion Colsey. You've got Micah Gilbert. You could even put Cam Williams there. The biggest reason why I'm so confident this receiving core will be at least pretty good is that right there. Is you're not dependent on if Chris Mitchell's not able to make the transition to Notre Dame and he can't be that guy that he was at Florida National, they're in trouble. That's not true. If Bo Collins isn't a dude, they're screwed. I don't think that's true. I don't think the unit can reach its full potential. But in the past, it was if they don't step up, you are not good. You need the transfers to play at a relatively high level if this unit's going to play championship football. You need the sophomores to do that. But to just be good, the margin for error is a lot wider now. And the sophomore class is a big reason for that because that's what I think where a lot of your playmakers are. Then you've got the veterans. And this is really what it boils down to for me of why I'm confident. Because what I just said leads me into right under this. Jaden Thomas and Deion Colsey are talented football players. Talented football players. If they both play to if just one of them plays to their potential, they're going to be very good players. Jaden Thomas is a guy that the people around their name rave about. Well, he's this, he's that. And at times we've seen it. The problem is he hasn't been healthy. Deion Colsey, same thing. lack of focus sometimes, lack of effort sometimes, and just can't stay healthy. Last year, those two guys going down completely destroyed your receiving core, just destroyed it. You had to take Greathouse, who was playing well, out and put him into the boundary. You had to put Jordan Faison on the field, which meant you had to now put him on scholarship. You had to ramp up Rico Flores and ask a lot more of him. He wasn't ready for it. You know, you look at it and say you were put in this position to where you were asking guys who couldn't do what you were asking them to do, and they couldn't do it, and you were screwed. What this group has is the talent to say, hey, listen, you don't need everything to go perfect. You don't need these. If Jaden Thomas and Deion Colsey both get hurt again, they're going to be okay. It's better if they play, but you're going to be okay. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them today because we've talked about them a million times. We know what Jaden Thomas can do. If he's healthy, he's savvy. He's going to be he's that 4 catch for minimum 50-yard guy every game. And you look at the stat sheet and you're like, oh, there you go. He was a pretty good player, right? And that's who he is. And if he can be that kind of guy, then you're great. But he's got to prove that he can stay healthy. And so far, he hasn't been able to prove he can stay healthy. And until he does, you really don't know you really don't know what to expect from him. He can be that guy, but he just hasn't shown that during his career. When you look at Deion Colsey, loads of talent. We've been waiting on that talent to emerge, and it hasn't. Now you look at it and say, okay, what's he going to do? I don't know. But now you're in a situation where if Deion steps up and is great, that's awesome. That's great. If he doesn't, that's disappointing for him personally, but it doesn't mean the receiving corps can't still be playoff caliber. That's the big difference now between what the receiving corps is now and what it's been in the past, is that type of depth. And we're not even talking about the freshmen yet. That's the thing. You know, and when you look at last year's receiving corps, here's the reality. And we're seeing, I think it's an Ohio State fan in the chat. I think, Sean, if you're not an Ohio State fan, Sean, and I have that wrong, please correct me. But I believe Sean's an Ohio State fan. We've seen him here before. You're talking about Rico Flores. Wasn't he your best guy last year? No, he wasn't. He was their most productive guy at the end of the year, but he was not their best receiver. He was not even the best guy in his class. Jaden Greathouse was that until Jaden Thomas got hurt, and that forced Jaden Greathouse to move outside. And then he got hurt, and that's when you saw Jordan Faison and Rico Flores step in. And the reality is Rico had good numbers, but the level of play wasn't that good. And because he just was thrust into a role he shouldn't have had. There was ability there, but if you look at this year's team, if Rico is coming back, he's at best, your 5th best receiver, at best. He's not ahead of Chris Mitchell. He's not ahead of Bo Collins. He's not ahead of Jaden Greathouse. He's probably not ahead of Jordan Faison, and he's probably not ahead of Jaden Thomas if Jaden is healthy. Now, you can maybe argue he's ahead of Jordan Faison because he can play more outside than Jordan Faison can. Okay, fine. I wouldn't agree with that, but you can have that conversation. And then part of it is, again, KK Smith was hurt all year last year. You didn't even have KK as an option. So when I look at this team, it's the depth of talent, the diversity of talent, where last year a problem that you had was everybody was kind of a slot. That's the reality. Part of the reason Rico left, part of it is a lot of reasons, is because he wanted to play more in slot. Notre Dame, it's like, no, you're not going to play there. And so when I look at this team, it's the depth of talent is such that we don't even need to talk about the freshmen. We will. To have a sense of there's a lot of depth and a lot of talent here. As I mentioned, there's over 3,000 yards coming back to this roster from last year's production. When you look at Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins and Jaden Harrison being added to the mix, those 3 right there, just those 3 right there, gives Notre Dame. So let's see, Chris Mitchell. Let me just look up the numbers here real quick. So Chris Mitchell last season at Florida International had, what did we say earlier, 64 catches for 1,118 yards. So let's go 1,118 yards. You had 510 from Bo Collins, and you had, 410 from Chris Mitchell? You had 410 from Chris Mitchell. So just the 3 transfers had 2,038 yards last year receiving, just those 3 players. Then you throw in Jaden Thomas, Jordan Faison, Jaden Greathouse, the tight end position. You have over 3,000 yards coming back, right? To the point where I don't care that Rico left, and it's probably better that he did because he was not going to play as much as he did last year. And if Jaden Thomas steps up and plays great, that's wonderful. If Deion Colsey does, wonderful, but you don't need it. And then when you look at the freshman class, they're only going to play if they force their way onto the field. And the thing that kind of excites you is they're kind of doing that. I mean, Micah Gilbert started in the Jersey scrimmage at boundary receiver. Now, it wasn't Deion Colsey. Jaden Thomas was banged up. It wasn't, Bo Collins wasn't here yet, so keep that in mind. But he was that guy. And he caught, 2 touchdown passes in the spring game. One of them was against walk-ons, but still, he played very well. He's forcing his way into the conversation. Cam Williams is arguably your most physically talented receiver on the roster. Now, he's raw. He's got a lot to learn, but he's 6'2", really fast, and really dynamic. To where now, if Cam's just kind of a play him every now and then to get his feet wet kind of guy, you're okay with that because you have so many other weapons. And that's where Notre Dame has not been in the past. They've not been that type of team. They have that now. So now if Micah Gilbert plays, he's like a freshman at Bama. He's a freshman at Georgia. He's a freshman at Ohio State. I mean, look, you look at last year. Let's take the Buckeyes, for example, because that's the team that all Notre Dame fans like to talk about when we talk about receiving corps. Talk about receivers. Look at their production last year. I would argue, and I still believe this, that Ohio State had the best freshman receiving corps in the country last year, like coming in out of high school. You had Cardinal Tate, who we know all about. You had Brandon Ennis, who we know all about. And you had Noah Rogers coming in from North Carolina, right? I mean, just an outstanding receiving corps. Cardinal Tate caught 18 passes for 264 yards last year. So that's less than Jaden Greathouse, right? Or about what Jaden Greathouse had. Greathouse had, Jaden was at 18 for 265. So Cardinal Tate, 18 for 264, 1 touchdown. Jaden Greathouse, 18 for 265, 5 touchdowns. Neither of them were as productive as Jordan Faison, also a freshman. 19 catches for 322 yards and 4 touchdowns. Neither one of them were as productive as Rico Flores as a true freshman. 27 catches for 392 yards and a touchdown. That's 10 touchdowns from your freshman class. Ohio State's talented freshman class, which I would argue was legitimately talented, had 2 touchdown catches. They had a grand total of 19 total catches last year. That's it. That's it for barely over 300 yards. So does that mean that Notre Dame's freshman receivers are better than Ohio State's? No, it doesn't mean that. It means the opportunity wasn't there for the freshman Ohio State because of who they had to pass up. You had to pass up Marvin Harrison Jr. You had to pass up Emeka Egbuka. You had to pass up Julian Fleming. You had to pass up Cade Stover as a target. So it was about opportunity. Freshmen don't often put up a lot of numbers at those type of schools. And I would argue Cardinell's path to playing was easier for him than it has been for a lot of other receivers when they've come in to Ohio State. When you look at Marvin Harrison in 2021, think about this. Marvin Harrison, as a freshman, his numbers were less than every single freshman that Notre Dame had in the rotation last year. All 3 of them had more catches, more yards, and I believe more touchdowns. What was Marvin's touchdowns in 2021? He had 3. Okay, so 2 of them had more. Actually, no. What did Rico have last year? Okay, Rico only had 1. It was against Ohio State. 2 of your 3 freshmen had more receiving touchdowns as true freshmen than Marvin Harrison. All of them caught more balls than Marvin Harrison. All of them had more yards than Marvin Harrison. Does that mean that they were better than Marvin Harrison as freshmen? No. It's about opportunity because in 2021, Ohio State had Jackson Smith-Njigba, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Emeka Egbuka, and Marvin Harrison. And, of course, they had the tight ends and the running backs. The opportunity wasn't there. Notre Dame is now in a situation where with Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert and Logan Saldate, who I've heard great things about from this summer, they're in a situation where they don't have to play. They're only going to play now if they force their way into the field. That's not been true for a long time in Notre Dame. They would have had to have played as freshmen for the last 5 years, every single one of them. Now, you don't necessarily, quote unquote, need any of the freshmen, and the one that you may need is Micah Gilbert. They're going to play because it's, hey, I'm just too good not to play. The only reason Cardinal Tate played as much as he did last year was injury, and he was just too good to not play. That's why Cardinal had better production as a rookie than Marvin Harrison did, or Emeka Egbuka had, because of the opportunity was there. The need was greater because of Emeka being out. And that's a big part of why his production was even where it was. If Emeka is not out, in my opinion, I don't know that his production is even as good as it was. Because if you look at Cardinal's production, he had 3 catches for 79 yards against Penn State or Purdue, 3 catches for 21 yards against Penn State, and 1 catch for 14 yards against Wisconsin. So 7 of his 18 catches came in that stretch. You know what else was going on in that stretch? Those are the games that Emeka was out, right? So then Emeka comes back, and Cardinal Tate's back to 1 to 2 catches a game, right? So the opportunity wasn't there. You're in a situation now where Notre Dame's this is one of the better freshman classes they've had in a while, right? 23 was also pretty good, but this high level better. But they're not going to play as much. Why? Because you're in such a different situation, depth-wise, talent-wise. You've got the transfers, you've got the veterans, you've got the sophomores to where you don't need the talented freshmen to play. And that's a great place to be for Notre Dame. And it's one of the big reasons why I have such a high level of excitement for what this receiving core can do. A lot of growth is needed. A lot of maturity as players is needed. You've got to get them to come together. We haven't seen them together because we didn't see Bo this spring. We didn't see Logan Saldate this spring. We didn't see Jordan Faison this spring. So now we've got to see these guys come together, and how do they develop as a unit? How does Mike Brown handle the rotation? How does Mike Denbrock handle the rotation? How do they keep all of them happy while within the system? Because you can't keep guys happy arbitrarily. It has to be part of the system, part of the framework of who you are. Can they make a rotation that's deep enough to utilize all your talent, but not done in a way to where nobody gets in the flow of the game? Last year, they kept rotating guys on every play, a new receiver's coming in, and nobody can get into the rhythm. That's a terrible way of going about it. But what's the right way? Can Mike Brown and Mike Denbrock develop the right way? We're going to find that out. And if they do, I'm just going to say it, I think this receiving core is going to be one of the best Notre Dame's had in a long time. They may not have a Chase Claypool from 19. They may not have a Will Fuller from 14 and 15. Individual player. And they don't. I don't think they have that guy. I don't think they have a Michael Foote. I don't think they have a Golden Tate on this roster. At least not that's ready to be that now. But as a unit, I think this could be one of the best receiving cores Notre Dame's had in a very long time. The talent's there. The depth is there. Now we got to see if they can utilize it. We got to see if the players can step up. And we got to see if the quarterback plays good enough to get them the football. That's what we're going to have to find out. But I do believe in a lot in the talent that Notre Dame has at this position going into the 2024 season. Archer just jumps into the chat after we just got done talking about how Ohio State's receivers are overrated and can't play, and they can't hang with Notre Dame's, because if you look at the freshman production, it was way better at Notre Dame than it was at Ohio State. So Archer, you missed all that. I'm just kidding. We didn't talk about that at all. I'm just messing with you. It's good to have you in the chat. We're going to get into some recruiting here next. So let's get to part 2. Well, it's kind of part 3 of today's show. Recruiting at Notre Dame at receiver. It's not going great. It's not going great. Like, look, guys, here's what I'm not going to do today. There's 2 things I'm not going to do. Number 1, I'm not going to say the sky's falling and everything is terrible and Mike Brown's on the hot seat. Mike Brown sucks and the coaches they're terrible. I'm not going to say that. I'm also not going to say, hey, guys, it's all good. It's all part of the plan. Everything's fine. Everything's awesome. There's a building burning behind me, but nothing to see here. Everything is fine. We're not going to play that game either, because the truth is kind of back in the middle. The truth is what's happened over the last few weeks is not good at all. Some of it was expected. Some of it wasn't. The truth is that they are also in a position where I think they're going to be okay in the long run. And so we can admit that what's going on now, not good. But we're also not going to lose our minds and start talking about firing a receivers coach and all this other nonsense. That's just not where we're going to be. So let's talk about receiver recruiting, and we'll just talk about kind of what's happened. And The beginning of this part is going to be negative. So if you're someone who wants to hear everything is awesome and roses and sunshine, you may want to tune out for the next 10, 15 minutes. Because we're going to go over some of the issues that I have with receiver recruiting, because it's not good. You can't look at what's happened and say, it's all good. It's all part of the plan, all part of the strategy. No, it's not. So what's happened in the recent weeks? So let's just kind of go in order. Obviously, Derek Meadows committed to LSU on Saturday. LSU being the pick was more of a late sort of thing that's happened over the last month. For a long time, it was about Alabama. Look, guys, I know a lot of you were shocked because you had heard, or you were disappointed because you'd heard from others that Notre Dame was the leader. If you're a message board member, I would encourage you to go read the intel, not the intel piece, but the stuff I put out about the background of this. I'm not going to get into it in this sort of open forum, but the reality is that was never true. Derek Meadows almost committed to Notre Dame over a year ago after Irish invasion, when they were the only really big school to offer him. He held off because he just wasn't sold on Notre Dame at the time. Washington quickly became his leader, and as Ryan told you this, I told you this for months. Washington was the leader, not Notre Dame, before Kalen DeBoer left for Bama. Then Notre Dame had a real brief period of time there where they were kind of the big school that was recruiting him again. Then all of a sudden he has that camp performance where all these SEC schools start offering him, and immediately Notre Dame gets put on the back burner. Why? Because Notre Dame was never truly the place he definitely wanted to go for a number of reasons, which I'm not going to get into in this show. It's all laid out in that intel piece. So if you want to know the backstory of what the issue was, go read that. They were never the leader. They weren't the leader a month and a half ago, and everybody was saying how wrong we were, and we don't have good intel, and we don't have good sources, and we don't have all this because all the other sites are telling you Notre Dame's the leader, Notre Dame's the leader. They weren't. They were not the leader. They're just flat out, they weren't. Nobody that I know at Notre Dame felt that they were the leader. None of my sources felt they were the leader. I don't know where it came from. I don't know who people are talking to, but they were never the leader. So what you have to understand about the Derek Meadows recruitment is that this entire time, and last week, people sending me text message, hey, so-and-so saying Notre Dame's lead. It was never true. It was very consistent. Now, the Notre Dame folks did a great job of closing the gap and giving them something to think about. There's no doubt about that. They were never the leader. They were never about to get him. There was never any, hey, I think they might pull this one off on Saturday. None of that was true. It wasn't. Makes for a great story and helps you kind of generate some message board posts and some articles that people are going to click on and read and generate ad revenue, but it wasn't the reality of the situation. And I'm going to use it that way because the other ways of saying it are a little harsh, and I'm not trying to go there. It wasn't the reality of the situation. What Notre Dame was doing, and so that matters because you have to understand that Notre Dame staff was prepared for the decision that was made on Saturday, and they've been prepared for that for a couple months now. They have been battling hard to, if we can pull off an upset, that's great. But Notre Dame has been playing the long game with Derek Meadows for a while with the hope that, okay, he's going to make a decision this summer, most likely, but we care more about the decision he makes in December. That's where Notre Dame was with Derek Meadows. So that shouldn't surprise anyone. Anyone that's a message board member is not at all surprised by what happened. Now, well, shouldn't be anyway. Some of you still believe the other stuff because it sounds better. I don't give you what sounds better. I give you the truth. And the truth is that Notre Dame was not going to get him. They have not been the leader for him for a very, very, very long time. Ryan told you that. I told you that. That's been what we've been telling you for a long time. And it wasn't our feeling. It wasn't our emotion. It wasn't our gut. It was intel on both sides. That's where it was. So Notre Dame is just kind of rolling along with the Meadows recruitment. They were prepared for this. They're going to keep on them. Once they kind of get into the season, I expect Notre Dame to ramp things back up if things go well. So that shouldn't surprise anybody. The two that stung were Tanook Hines and Dylan Robinson. And I'm not going to get into what happened with Tanook, but Notre Dame basically had him in the class. Some things happened. Not just USC offering a big deal. Some other things happened, and that's partly why Tanook went to USC. The Dylan Robinson one stings to me because he was the guy that I liked the most as an all-around player. I've said before I actually like him better than Derek Meadows. He was all basically in the class and then kind of had some cold feet about playing offense. Washington came in late with a really good pitch. Credit to the Washington staff. They kind of read the room. They said, look, you want to play receiver, we'll play receiver, but we'll let you give you a shot to play defense too, and you can play both sides of the ball. And that kind of fed into his uncertainty about, do I really want to play just offense? He went, from what I'm told, he went back to Notre Dame staff and talked about that pitch, and Notre Dame was honest with him. Like, look, Xavier Watts started off on offense. Cam Hart started off on offense. They both end up on defense, but we really like you here. Our need is here. This is where we want you to play. And they were honest with him, and I respect that. And that ultimately is why he ended up at Washington. Well, they didn't lose him because of NIL. If Notre Dame wanted to with Tanook Hines, if Notre Dame wanted to offer him a deal, they could have. They didn't lose him because of NIL. They didn't lose Derek Meadows because of NIL. They're very competitive in that landscape. But just because you can offer a guy an NIL package doesn't mean you're going to, or that you should. You have to spend money wisely. And so that's kind of why Notre Dame was willing to kind of let that one play out the way that it did. The Dylan Robinson is the only one that was a shocker that is stings, because it wasn't about money. Dylan Robinson didn't take a big NIL payout to go. I mean, is he getting an NIL deal? Sure, but he would have got an NIL deal from Notre Dame as well. That was about the same, if not a little bit more. It really came down to his comfort level where he sees his future as a player. And that's kind of what happened there and why Notre Dame lost him. Now, here's what I'm not doing right now, folks. I'm not spinning this to you. I'm not telling you it's okay. I'm telling you just what happened. But we had a philosophy when Bryan Kelly was the head coach, who I didn't care much for, that we're going to give you an honest opinion, and at the end of the day, the results are what matter on the recruiting trail. What are the results? I don't want to hear any excuses. What are the results? And that's also going to be true for Marcus Freeman's tenure. And I like Marcus Freeman personally a lot more than I like Bryan Kelly. I'm optimistic about his potential with the program more than I was about Bryan Kelly. All that's true, but it's irrelevant to this conversation, because the reality is, no matter what the reasons and the justifications and the excuses and the what happens and hey, you know what? I understand. The fact is this: they went 0 for 3. That's it. That's the data at the end of the day. They went 0 for 3. It's not good. There's no spinning it. And you know what I like? I don't have a single source right now that I've talked to that's trying to spin it. I think Notre Dame understands this isn't good, and so you got to figure it out. So when you look at the recruiting in 2025, say these are bad misses. The thing that makes it more concerning for me is these kind of misses happen. It's the problem is it's not just these misses. This has been a strange recruiting cycle, period, at receiver. You had these late misses. You had some, in my opinion, bad evaluations. I think Notre Dame did a poor job evaluating Dalen McCutcheon. I think Notre Dame did a poor job evaluating Cooper Perry, just based on my personal evaluation of those players. I could be wrong. They could be right, but I'm just telling you my honest opinion. You could have had Cooper Perry in this class. Cooper Perry loved Notre Dame. Cooper Perry would have definitely come to Notre Dame if Notre Dame would have made a push for him. And he's a very, very good football player. And I'm not even just talking about from a recruiting ranking standpoint. He's a top 100 guy in the country according to Rivals. He's a top 200 guy according to ESPN. He's a 4-star at 247. He's a really, really good football player that picked Oregon over Washington and some others. So clearly Oregon, a top 5 team, thinks highly of him. I think that was a mistake. If we're sitting here and Notre Dame has Cooper Perry in the class, we're not as upset about this one. And they didn't miss on Cooper Perry. They passed on Cooper Perry. They passed on Dalen McCutcheon. Maybe Dalen McCutcheon still picks Florida State. Maybe. But I like where Notre Dame stood on that one. If they would have pushed, they chose not to push. There were some other kids in the class. They chose not to take John Anthony Hall. They could have had him in the class if they wanted him. They chose not to. And it's not just because they thought they were going to get these other guys. That's part of it. But they made an evaluation that I think was incorrect. I won't get into it too much. I should say I don't agree with it. You give me one of those 3 players in this class right now, and we are a little like, okay, it's got to get better. You got to do a little better. You got to land some of those top guys like a Dylan Robinson or Derek Meadows. But you know what? You're in a good place. But you didn't. You evaluated those players that way, and you passed. And here's the other thing that I also don't agree with, or is puzzling to me. How do you take Sean Terry and pass on Cooper Perry and Dalen McCutcheon? I don't understand. Like, you can, okay, well, with Dalen McCutcheon, okay, he's not real fast. Well, neither Sean Terry. He's a mid 4.5 guy, right? Like, there was a lot of weird evaluations that happened in the cycle. And to me, that's that's one of the concerning things that we saw. And then the other part of it is, look, the reality is they had some guys they really liked a lot that just weren't interested. Taylor, for whatever reason, just wasn't interested. Quincy Porter, who Notre Dame liked, wasn't interested. Brandon Finney, they liked him. He wasn't interested. I don't know if they liked him as much as others, but he wasn't interested. Jamie French, they had on campus multiple times. He wasn't interested. They tried to make a run at Phillip Bell out of California. He wasn't interested. There's a lot of kids that just weren't interested. And I'll be honest, the lack of receiver production hurt more in this class than I expected it to. Because Notre Dame landed back-to-back really good receiver classes, without a lot of proven production. So I just kind of assumed wrongly that wasn't going to be a big issue in this class. And it was. It was an issue with Derek Meadows. It was an issue with Taylor. It was an issue with Jamie French. It's not the only issue. If Notre Dame went out and passed for 4,000 yards last year, I'm not saying they would have got any of those guys. I'm just saying they would have been in the game more. They really weren't even in the game with a lot of these guys. And it's not, some of it's NIL related with some of them. But again, that's not the big boogeyman that people make it out to be for Notre Dame, because Notre Dame is very competitive on the NIL landscape for top players. I think the lack of production at Notre Dame is hurting them. And people say, well, look what Mike Denbrock did. But it doesn't matter what he did at LSU. He's got to show he can do it at Notre Dame. Well, look at what Mike Brown did at Cincinnati. Guys, we all know that because we follow college football. But y'all have to understand something. When Mike Brown was putting that really good receiving core at Cincinnati out there, these kids weren't even thinking about college football recruiting to the level they are now, and they weren't thinking about Cincinnati. Mike Brown is a guy that, as a coach, has to step up. There's no doubt. He's got to do better. He's got to adjust from what it's like to recruit at Cincinnati and what it's like to recruit Wisconsin compared to what it's like at Notre Dame. He entered kind of midstream, right? That factors in. So we'll learn a lot more about him in 26 than we will in 25. That's just the reality. We always say that. But he's going through that adjustment period from 25 or from being at Cincinnati, which is at the time a group of 5 school, going to Wisconsin, it's a mid-level Power 5 school, to now you're going to one of the big boys. And recruiting is very different at that level. And so I think you're seeing Notre Dame still spending a little bit too much time on certain evaluating differently with him anyway, that I don't think you should do, in my opinion. We've seen this before, and we saw this with Mike Mickens. Mike Mickens did a really nice job in 2021 with that class, considering all the craziness of the world. He couldn't go on the road recruiting, so it's kind of hard to evaluate him. But there were times when you felt like, okay, he wasn't getting a lot of traction in that first cycle with some of the top guys. So they had to take some project type of guys, some guys with low floor. Ryan Barnes, a guy I liked a lot as a pickup for Notre Dame, low floor, high ceiling, never quite panned out. Philip Riley was that way. Chance Tucker was that way. Guys with some ability, but you were taking some flyers on guys. Much like we think the receiving court class is doing this year with Elijah Burris and Jerome Bettis Jr. and guys like that. I think Elijah Burris is better. I grade him out higher than I did those players coming at cornerback, but you get the point. And then it took him really one full year, that partial cycle, and then his first full class where you started to see things change a little bit. In 2022, he goes out and gets Benjamin Morrison, goes out and gets Jaden Mickey, right? Raises the bar. Second full class, he goes out there and gets Christian Gray and Micah Bell and raises the bar even higher. And now we look at Mike Mickens as an elite recruiter that we can't live without as Notre Dame fans, right? Let's be honest with ourselves, Notre Dame fans. Let's be very honest. It wasn't that long ago, like less than 2 years, that a lot of the things that you guys are talking about with Mike Brown is the same exact thing you were saying about Mike Mickens. Same exact thing. So we need to have an honest conversation about Mike Brown. Number one, the 25 cycle recruiting, not good enough. Big whiffs. You've got to do better. It's not panic time yet. Let's see what happens with 26. Let's see what happens when he has a season under his belt coaching this group before we kind of panic. Because, again, we've been here before. You don't justify the recruiting by pointing to the transition. You don't justify the recruiting by pointing to the fact that Chancey Stuckey was not staying on some of the top receivers in the 25 class during his last couple months. You can't do that. You don't ignore that. You don't sit there and say, hey, listen, excuse. It's because of this. You don't do that. You have to be able to look and say, hey, listen, this is where we're at. This is basically the reality of this is not good enough. But you also can't ignore those factors. And you can't take those, you can't ignore that they're not part of the conversation. You have to be honest about it and say, okay, but can they do better in 26? And now he's getting a chance to do that. But we've been here a little bit before. There's some things that have factored into it as well. As I said, I think the production issues have been more profound now than they were before, beyond what I expected. Again, I'll be honest, I'm surprised at how much the lack of production is hurting Notre Dame. And honestly, part of it's because you're seeing a lot more negative recruiting against Notre Dame. And when I mean negative recruiting, I don't mean it in a dirty sense. I mean it in a practical sense. It's look at the numbers, look at the data. We're going to point out the problems of Notre Dame because we can't point to certain other things anymore because of how good this staff is at recruiting. So we've now got to kind of undercut Notre Dame a little bit. And this is a position where it works. And so you saw a lot more of that. And the reality is the data backs it up. I mean, if you look at Notre Dame's, there's two things hurting Notre Dame right now. Number one, recent production in the pass game. Notre Dame went out last year and landed a guy that's one of the all-time most productive quarterbacks in college football history. He comes to Notre Dame and doesn't even get to 3,000 yards. This is a kid that's been over 4,000 yards in his career. This is a kid, Sam Hartman, that in 2022 passed for over 3,700 yards at Wake, passed for 4,200 a year before that, and was in the top 20 all-time in passing yards and passing touchdowns in his career. Comes to Notre Dame and doesn't even get to 2,700 yards. Only throws for 24 touchdowns. Is not the impactful player was as a sixth-year senior. Notre Dame as a team last year goes out in the pass game and barely throws for 3,000 yards. They get over 3,205. That's it. 31 touchdowns is okay, but a lot of that was mop-up duty. 3,200 yards passing. In 2022, Notre Dame only passed as a team for 2,692 yards, 25 touchdowns, 11 picks. In 2021, that's the really good year that they had with Jack Cohn and Tyler Buckner. They passed for 3,672 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 10 picks. That's not bad. 2020, they only passed for 2,849 yards, 15 touchdowns. 2019, you had a 1,000-yard receiver, but you only passed for 3,278 yards. So in the last 5 years, Notre Dame has only gone over 3,300 yards twice. And they've had 2 years where they had less than 3,000 yards passing from your starter. Like, that's a problem. That's being used against them. And I'll be honest, I misjudged how impactful that would be. Because I looked, well, they got Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert and Logan Soldate when that was true. They got Jaden Greathouse and Braylon James and Rico Flores and KK Smith when that was true. Why would it matter now? Well, it mattered now. For whatever reason, it mattered now. So Notre Dame is in a situation where a lot of different things factored into why you struck out. And those aren't excuses. Those are realities. It doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make it understandable. It doesn't mean that I'm going to sit here and say, I'm not worried. I am concerned about it because you've got to prove something. But here's the situation that we're in, though, is the yards. You can't change the yards. You can't change the past. You can't change the fact that Notre Dame, think about this, folks. Notre Dame has not had a wide receiver get drafted since 2020 when Chase Claypool went in the second round. 21 class draft, 22 draft, 23 draft, 24 draft. 4 drafts have gone by now with 0 Notre Dame wide receivers getting drafted. 0. Including a dude that had over 40 catches, 800 yards, and blew up the combine. I mean, Kevin also put up crazy numbers at the combine. And he went undrafted. There's a lot of reasons. And every kid went undrafted. For Avery Davis, it was injuries. And then for, these, it was different. And so people talking about Ben Skoranek is not a Notre Dame guy. He was here as a transfer for a year. That's not moving the, and he's a 7th round pick. That kids don't care about that. They have not had a Notre Dame player get drafted. And that's what's going to be interesting this year is when you look at the transfers that are coming in this year. They're not Notre Dame guys, but they can help move the needle a little bit. Can they turn those guys into draft picks? I don't know the answer to that. But Notre Dame's going to have to show that they can develop their guys. Because, again, Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins blowing up this year is going to help them go out in the transfer portal next year and have success. Because, like, look, you can come here for a year. It'll move the needle a little bit when it comes to high school recruiting if you go out and have a big year. Because you can say, look, the offense is different. They're passing for this amount of yards. They're doing this. They're doing that. All these things are good. That helps. But you got to show that we can take a guy in as a high school senior and coach him up and develop him. It's similar to what we've talked about with Coach Washington on the D-line. Those are things that can only get fixed in time. But what you can do immediately is improve your pass game. And that's where a lot of stuff we talked about before comes into play. It's, when you look at Notre Dame's receiving core, the potential that it has, if it can play to its potential, then they can have the type of production that then moves the needle at receiver in recruiting in 26. It can. But you've got to produce it, because if you have another mediocre passing year, even if the offense scores 40 points a game, but they're rushing for a bunch of yards and the scrambles and all that other kind of stuff, then it doesn't move the needle, and you're going to have some similar struggles in 26. It's imperative that Notre Dame go out this year and produce in the pass game at a much higher level. That will help you with some of those 26 kids that like you, but don't really want to, or have concerns about, can this guy be or can this offense be one that can help me go become a first-round pick or a second-round pick? There's a lot to prove. The other thing is that you're going to have to figure something out in the meantime. Notre Dame can't say, okay, well, we're going to have to wait till 26 and 27 to get to the point where we're going to recruit to that level. You got to figure some answers out now. Here's a little bit of good news for y'all to think about and why I'm not panicked yet. If this was left tackle or running back or quarterback or corner or D tackle that you're having these issues, I'd be a lot more concerned, because those guys are more rare. The elite level left tackles are more rare, harder to find. Same thing at quarterback. Same thing at cornerback. You can find good athletes, but I'm talking about high level players. Receiver is one position where, if we're being honest, there's a plethora of players out there to find. They may not all be Marvin Harrison Jr.'s. They may not all be Malik Neighbors. They may not all be that type of guy. But there's a lot of guys out there that are fast and can play, partly because there's just more body types like that. There's not as many 6'6", 295-pound athletes out there. There's a lot of 6 foot, 185-pound guys that can run really fast. There's a lot of those guys out there. There's a lot of guys that are under the radar, that aren't getting looked at as much, that go to smaller schools and become studs, right? There's players out there like that eventually go to smaller schools, dominate, and then get, transferred to the bigger schools. They have shown that they can go find those guys in recent years. They did it with Logan Saldate last year, who I graded as a 4-star player. They did it with KK Smith the year before. Notre Dame will recover well from these misses. Here's the difference. You can't make your living doing that. When you went out and got KK Smith, who y'all know I like a lot, he was a part of what was already a strong receiver class. You already had Jaden Greathouse. You had Braylon James. You had Rico Flores. Then you add KK Smith. When you went out and got Logan Saldate last year, you added him to a class that had Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert. What they're kind of doing now is these guys are going to have to kind of be on par with your top guy. They may even be your top guy. Maybe Elijah Burris jumps out there and has a great year this year. But right now, he's a top 250-ish kind of guy on my board, not the top 150 guy that KK. KK was a borderline top 100 receiver on my board. Logan Saldate was the top 150 to 200 guy, right? You now have to find that guy and recover now. But in the future, Notre Dame always should and must find those type of guys. Get the Elijah Burrises, get the KK Smiths, get the Logan Saldates, get the Avery Davises that move position. Find those guys. They're out there. Go get them every year. Get those guys. But to truly take this receiving core to the next level to where it is on the same level as what LSU did last year, you also have to go out and find some of those Malik Neighbors types. Now, again, Malik Neighbors is not a guy that was a big-time recruit coming out of high school, but he was a top recruit coming out of high school, for being honest. He wasn't some three-star kid nobody ever heard of. Yes, they had Justin Jefferson, who was a three-star recruit, not even ranked in the top 1,000. I get all that. I understand all that. That's rare. Malik Neighbors is more in line with what you see. He was not, you know how many services ranked Malik Neighbors as a top 100 player? 0. 247 Sports ranked him number 150. On3 ranked him number 135. That was retroactive. He was already in college by the time their rankings came out. Rivals didn't have him in their top 250, but they still had him at least as a 4-star. So, like, you need to find guys like that who have that elite potential. You look at a guy like Bryan Thomas at LSU last year, breaks out, big-time player. He was more highly ranked. He was ranked number 69 by 247, number 111 by ESPN, number 141 by ESPN, by Rivals. So I'm not talking about you got to go get Jamie French. You got to go out and get Caleb Cunningham. You got to go out and get Marvin. You're rarely going to get those guys. I think the last guy like that Notre Dame got was probably Michael Floyd back in 2008. Because you've signed highly ranked guys, but Jaden Greathouse wasn't ranked that high. So Javon McKinley wasn't ranked that high. You're rarely going to get those guys. But what you can get are the Chase Claypools, the Miles Boykins, the Malik Neighbors, the Bryan Thomases, the guys like that. You're not going to get Marvin Harrison Jr., who also wasn't ranked that high. But you're not going to get Jamar Chase, who was a 5-star guy. You're not going to get Devontae Smith, who some had as a top 50 guy, as a 5-star guy. You're not going to get Jerry Jeudy. Those guys just aren't going to come to Notre Dame. They're just not. But the Chase Claypools will. The Miles Boykins will. The Will Fullers will. The Malik Neighbors ranking range is more in line with what Notre Dame can find. Find those guys. Land those guys. That's what Dylan Robinson was. That's what those players were, and those are the guys they missed on. Yes, get the underrated guys. Get the sleeper. Find those hidden gems. And I think Chad Bowden has shown he's really good at that. And now you've got Mike Brown, who I believe the staff respects as an evaluator, as part of this conversation too. I'm confident that Notre Dame is going to hit the road and find the next KK Smith. I'm confident in that. But you just can't make your living on that year after year after year. You can't. But it does help you salvage what's going on now. And that's right. You can't fast forward a year and see what's going to happen in 2026. You got to deal with the present reality. The present reality is they've got to go find that kind of guy. Here's the other part of it, though. Notre Dame has shown in the last 2 years that they can go out and get really good portal receivers. We spent a lot of time today talking about Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins. If those guys have success this year, it's going to open up the door for the next Chris Mitchell and the next Bo Collins. They're going to look at Notre Dame and say, hey, you know what? I can go Notre Dame and ball out in a year. Notre Dame missing at receiver is not much different than when they missed in past years. I'm not going to spin it. The losses that we have now are similar to losses they had under Del Alexander, which we criticized him for. The difference now is Notre Dame has the portal as an opportunity to supplement the roster in ways they didn't in 22 and 21 and 20 in different years. They can't go into the portal. They couldn't go into the portal. They'd get some grad transfers, but they weren't. The portal wasn't as big of a thing now as it used to be, or then as it is now. So you occasionally get the Ben Skoranek type, who's a nice complementary player, but now you're getting potential difference makers. Notre Dame doesn't want to live on the portal. They don't. What they want to do is recruit high school players and then fill some needs in the portal. But you can't ignore the fact that if they don't make up for it, that they can just go to the portal again next year and land pieces they may land. You also can't ignore the fact that they recruited very well at receiver the last 2 years. So when you look at the current roster, you've got Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, KK Smith, Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, Logan Saldate, plus any portal options you have, plus Elijah Burris. They're going to be okay the next couple years. But you can't have multiple years like this. You can't have years back to back to back that are like this. This has to be the one-off. And it is. I got somebody in the chat saying that they don't know how to talk to offensive players. That's an emotional reaction. That's not a reality, right? That's emotional. They have had no problem talking to top offensive players, a quarterback, running back, wide receiver last year, wide receiver the year before that. You guys do know Marcus Freeman was part of the staff that landed Jaden Greathouse, Braylon James, Rico Flores, Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, Logan Saldate, and KK Smith.
You guys get that, right? They're the offensive staff that have gone out and landed big-time offensive line classes. They're the offensive staff that has gone out and gotten C.J. Carr, Kenny Minchie, and Deuce Knight, and Noah Grubbs. They're having a problem in one class at this position. If you're turning it into something bigger than that, that's a you problem, not a Notre Dame problem. However, if Notre Dame doesn't do better in the next cycle, now it becomes a more of a pattern, and that's where it's a problem. A lot of other people will say, well, is this going to worry Deuce Knight? Going to worry Deuce Knight? Again, you're being emotional. You're not being practical. I had somebody say, well, does this force Deuce Knight to look around? I said, well, why? Why would he look around? I asked that question. Well, because they're not getting pass catchers. I'm like, okay, well, how many receivers does Auburn have committed right now? How many receivers does Ole Miss have committed right now? How many top 100 tight ends does Ole Miss and Auburn have? Notre Dame has one. Like, you guys do realize that this is not 7-on-7. You're not recruiting Deuce Knight to be your 7-on-7 quarterback. You're recruiting him to be your college football 11-on-11 padded quarterback. Neither of those teams have anything close to the offensive line class that Notre Dame has. None of them have a James Flanagan on their team like Notre Dame does. Those things matter. Now, that doesn't mean that you excuse what's going on at receiver. You don't. But what I'm trying to get you all to do is stop being emotional in how you react and be more practical and say, hey, this is not good. They have to get better. But everything that's not good right now doesn't need to be turned into something that's bigger. It needs to be evaluated for what it is. Right now, it's bad. It's not good right now. It's not good. But it doesn't change what happened in the past, and it doesn't predict the future. You have to make adjustments. You have to do a better job. But right now, it's a one-off. They need to make sure that it stays that way and recover. And there's things that they need to do, which we laid out. So that's kind of where we're at with that. I did have a super chat that I wanted to get to before we did get out of here. Got Sean Higgins with a super chat. He says, thank you for the super chat, by the way, Sean. Without giving too much away, can you discuss Notre Dame's NIL strategy with Meadows and overall? Does each position group have a budget they manage to? No, there's not a budget per se. I mean, you only have so much money you can hand out, right? That's true for every school. What I'll say right now is Notre Dame is not going to allow NIL to be the reason that they don't get kids that they want and that they think are fits here. They are not going to just walk out and hand a kid $1 million just to sign on the dotted line. That's not going to happen. If a kid signs, he will have a package awaiting him that's substantial. There is a difference. Some people say that there isn't. There is. And Notre Dame, but what I'm saying is Notre Dame's not losing guys because they're not going to give money. Some guys just aren't willing to do things that they need to do to get the money. That's the difference. In certain position groups, you're just not going to spend that kind of money on. You're not going to spend that kind of money on a tight end. If a tight end doesn't understand what makes Notre Dame, then he's just, you'll give him money, but you're not going to give him this huge deal. You're not going to do that at certain positions. At some you are, at receiver you are, at other positions you are. And that's just the reality of the world we live in. But as far as like the budget, Mike Brown's not out there setting with a budget on receivers, and Mike Mickens doesn't have a budget for corners. It's here's the guys we want. Let's figure out how we can get them here and what role NIL has to play. That's the reality. And for kids that it's just NIL, like for example, Derek Meadows. Yes, NIL was a factor in Derek Meadows' decision. He for a time there, Notre Dame was well behind other schools, and Notre Dame had to step up to the plate, and they did. They still lost him. Why? Because I think the pieces in place that were helping Derek Meadows make the decision didn't like Notre Dame as much as they liked LSU. It's the reality of it. They didn't lose because of NIL. They lost them for other factors. They got to fix those other factors. NIL will take care of itself. Notre Dame is very competitive there. They now, if they weren't, then this would be a bigger problem. But if they can fix the on-field product, the other part is going to come because they are going to be competitive from a financial standpoint. Like, again, if you offer a kid $500,000 and another school offers him $550,000 and he likes you more than he likes the school, you don't got to get to $550,000. He's going to pick you. If you're offering a kid $100,000, and I'm just throwing out numbers, if you're offering a kid $100,000 and another school's offering him $500,000 and he likes that school as much as he likes you, guess what? He's going to go to that other school. That's just the reality. But we've seen kids in Notre Dame that have Jeremiah Love turned down much bigger financial deals from other schools to come to Notre Dame. But he didn't come to Notre Dame for free, right? They stepped up and put a package together that the fan was comfortable with. This is with a lot of the players that they're landing. That's just the reality that we live in now. And Notre Dame has embraced it. And they're doing it their way. And so far, it's been effective. We also have a super chat from Chief Brody. Enjoy the show. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that very, very much. So that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Tonight, IB Nation Sports Talk, 5 o'clock. I'll be back tomorrow with my man Vince. We're going to continue with our previews. We will probably do Big 12 this week at some point in time as well. Our Big 12 predictions, a lot more stuff, fun stuff to talk about. We're going to go through all the positions. Fall camp's 9 days away. Super excited about that. So make sure, folks, if you've not done so, sign up for the message board at boards.oursbreakdown.com. It's a way to support us. It's not, you're part of a great community, which is the best part of it. You're going to get intel that other people don't get. You're going to be told the truth, right? There's no spin. I don't get extra money by people clicking on the message board. We zero advertising on the message board. Zero. We don't make a dime off advertising. It's all off subscription service. And the way to keep people as members is to build a great community and give them good intel. You have to be reliable. We're not perfect, but we're reliable. We're going to give you good intel. We're not going to spin it. We're not going to do clickbait stuff. We're not going to tell you something because it makes you feel better. We're going to give you the truth. And that's another reason to be part of it. Great community and great value. We are much cheaper than other places when it comes to the amount you got to pay. There's no doubt about that. It's only the price for the first year. This is our price. So definitely come check us out at boards.oursbreakdown.com. You're going to love that. I think you guys are going to enjoy that very, very, very much. So I appreciate y'all very much for being with me today. I enjoyed it. I hope you guys come back again tomorrow, 1 o'clock, for another Notre Dame breakdown as part of the Irish Breakdown podcast.